people like myself who are land use planners. I'm also an architect and urban designer, and we have others in transportation, economic development, public health, arts and culture, and a few other disciplines, which put together, wide-ranging assistance which we can bring to our communities. So we're happy to be working with Winchester in this effort. So from here, we're basically going to give you a little background on the study introduction, and then really focus on number 3 and number 4 in this meeting, which is articulating the community vision for the North Main Street corridor, and then bringing forward this evening initial recommendations. There are 15 of them, which we're trying to get through this evening. So I'm a little conscious of the timing here. And so if I have any worries about this evening, it's that. So I will be moving a little bit quickly, just trying to make sure that we have enough time to engage. And we also have built into this presentation a lot, I think there's around 18 actually, Zoom polls, which will be inviting your feedback at those recommendations to see how they land with you, because they are initial at this point. We're trying to get a feel for where the support may be, and then we will be refining those recommendations from this point forward. So the first of those 18 Zoom polls is just to get a little feel for you all, since we just told you some about ourselves. And so let me bring that poll up. And you can see, hopefully, if you haven't used these before, it should be pretty self-explanatory. But I'm launching it now, and you should see it pop up on your screen. And it asks, what do you consider your primary relationship to North Main Street? So just a little bit about yourself relative to this study. And the options are: you're a resident on Main Street, a resident on an abutting side street, a resident of the area in general, a resident of the town more broadly, a business owner on North Main Street, a property owner on North Main Street, a patron of North Main Street, or a town meeting member, or a town board, committee, or staff member, or something else that we haven't captured in those options. So I know you only get one choice, but whichever one you identify with the most, I think would be appropriate. So please let us know that. It's like most people, 81% have voted. Give just a couple more seconds for anyone else who would like to get their vote in there. All right, so now I'm going to end that poll and share those results with you so you can see. So it looks like the most are self-identify as residents on an abutting side street, followed by a town meeting member or a town board, committee, or staff member. So thank you for that participation. So that's the mechanism by which we'll be getting feedback as we roll through this meeting. So hopefully that was easy enough. Last meeting, the first meeting we had in this process in March, we asked the same question, and it was similar results. So we had the highest response was resident on an abutting side street. And you can see we had, I think, a few more participants in that meeting. So maybe our numbers will grow as we get rolling here with a few more people joining us. And this is similar to what we provided you at the last meeting. So if you were here at the last one, you would have seen most of this, but we want to give the context for those who weren't. So this planning process, which we're a part of currently, is a result of the Winchester Master Plan 2030, and was a recommendation from that planning effort, a town-wide effort, looking at all aspects of the town, planning for them. And so the goal there that this process is a result of was to encourage more commercial, mixed use, and compact development in areas that support economic vibrancy, including strategic redevelopment parcels in town center and the identified evolving opportunity areas. So North Main Street is an identified evolving opportunity area. You can see some of the detail that was put forward in the Winchester Master Plan regarding creating an area plan for North Main Street. And so this process is the process to do that, to create an area plan for North Main Street that will envision public realm improvements, identify development opportunities, zoning amendments, and design guidelines to help shape the future of development. So that is what is underway. It is an implementation effort, really, of a planning process which the town has already completed. An award-winning planning process, I might add. So kudos to the town for that. And you can see some of the additional details there. Here's a map that was in the master plan about North Main Street and its two components, or the northern portion and the southern portion, and the surrounding and abutting side streets and neighborhoods. The purpose of the study is really covered in those 4 objectives you see. We're trying to develop a vision for the corridor based upon the community's feedback. We'll be sharing a draft of that vision this evening and getting your feedback on it. We're defining zoning recommendations. The initial set of those recommendations is taking shape, as you'll see this evening. And then defining design guidelines, which are also starting to take shape and what we have to share with you this evening. And then looking at ways that all of this can influence public realm improvements for pedestrian safety, additional landscape and streetscape improvements, and the like. So our study scope and work plan is pretty well aligned with those planning objectives. And we've been working our time and effort in these 5 various buckets and have at this point put hours into each of those tasks. Here's the project schedule, which has been laid out and which we've been working toward. We will continue. This is sort of one part of an overall process, a process of which I should say the end goal is to bring zoning modifications to a town meeting. And that town meeting may be as soon as the fall, or it may not be, depending on, in part, your feedback this evening and how your reaction to the initial recommendations looks. But also then just continued conversation with the planning board and the community over the summer about that timing and making sure that everyone feels comfortable with proceeding with the set of recommendations that's well supported. So this is our planning study is not the terminal point of our study is not the terminal point of this process, is what I should say, and that this process will continue with the ultimate goal being those zoning recommendations toward a town meeting in the future. But here we are at our second community meeting. The second community meeting, I should add, of this process, of our planning process, there will be, of course, additional community meetings and public hearings, which would be a part of that larger process to bring more defined zoning recommendations forward. A brief recap of the first community meeting that was back in the end of March. We had 68 in-meeting Zoom participants. We put together a poll, an online poll and survey that used the same questions and content that people could interact with after the meeting. We had 9 participants in that post-meeting follow-up. So 77 participants in total, based upon will be a part of the results you'll see throughout the presentation this evening. And we've also included in our thinking interviews with 10 stakeholders throughout North Main Street in the town, and are happy. We've been trying to continue to do those focused interviews with stakeholders and have had some missed connections occasionally. So we're happy to continue those. And if you'd like to be among that group that get an individual conversation, we'd be happy to connect with you after this meeting. And to do so, it would probably be best to shoot an email to Yolando. You can see his email address on the screen there. And we've been speaking with property owners, businesses and tenants, residents, planning board, and are connecting with the Historical Commission, Town Design Review Committee, and other boards like the Transportation Committee. So we are focused on the zoning districts along North Main Street, specifically GBD2 and GBD3. This study is not looking at the parcels outside of those 2 districts. So the neighboring parcels we're not contemplating changes on. So we're focused on those areas. You see 43 parcels in the GBD2. That's the area highlighted in the aerial on the screen. And a little less, 33 parcels as you move north to the city of Woburn line. There's 33 parcels up there in GBD3. All right, so now let's go ahead and dive right into the initial community vision and get your feedback on it. So we have a vision statement and some goals. And again, here's the background which the community vision and goals are based upon, which I just covered with you all. And among the feedback that we received from that group, we asked, what is the most important aspect of North Main Street? And so we found that most people thought the support for small businesses and economic activity on North Main Street, followed by a variety of activities that work well together, and then the quality variety of businesses and services, that it's a great place to live and a safe and pleasant place to walk and bike. So you can see those aspects of importance in North Main Street. We also asked, how close is North Main Street compared to what you would like it to be? How close is it today? And the vast majority thought that North Main Street is not very close to what they'd like it to be today, and that it could benefit from substantial changes and improvements. So that's a part of what we're trying to accomplish through these recommendations in the vision. Some additional questions to help us triangulate on the appropriate statement. What is missing from North Main Street? Safe walking and biking, and more street trees and landscaping were the top hits, followed by additional small businesses and services and more housing. And then the last meeting, we went through a series of analyses around the existing conditions in the North Main Street corridor today. And most people thought that the most important features of that analysis was the potential for change, which was a combination of many of the analyses that we went through. And if you didn't attend that previous meeting or see a recording of it, you could find that on the town's website and go back and watch that if you're curious. And then we've also been looking at past documents. We've mentioned the master plan, but there are other planning documents that have focused in the past on this corridor as well. And what we've come to understand from those past documents is that we're trying to add vitality to the commercial corridor with additional restaurant or retail uses specifically, that a mix of residential uses into the corridor above the ground floor, and specifically affordable units that would count towards the subsidized housing inventory are desirable. Retaining the character of the corridor and preserving key buildings and development patterns is another desirable feature, and improving pedestrian safety and walkability. And then this was some detailed language from that slide I pulled out directly from the master plan that is guiding our effort as well. So looking at a combination of physical improvements along the corridor with less restrictive zoning and development incentives that are looking to have more allowable development intensity, enticing existing property owners to consider redevelopment options and investment. And that ideally the changes would increase housing choice, establish a more robust commercial and jobs base, and increase visitation to the area. And that to make this happen, it's likely, the master plan posited, that zoning changes to allow higher intensity development, parcel consolidation, increased building heights, and a wider range of uses is likely needed. And that mixed use development with residential should be considered as an approach to meet the current demand for housing in the town, and also to leverage that housing for financial viability in terms of that mixed use development. So it seems like a lot of the documents are pointing in the same direction. This was the draft vision statement we tried to put together very succinctly to capture many of those sentiments. And I'll just read it for you all. The North Main Street corridor supports small businesses and economic activity in Winchester. The corridor has a variety of activities and uses that work well together with ground floor shops, restaurants, and services, and expanded housing choices with upper level residential units. North Main Street is an attractive and eclectic mix of new and historic buildings that are connected with consistent streetscape and landscape features, including generous shade trees and a network of pocket parks. North Main Street is safe and comfortable for walking, biking, and driving. So it's pretty straightforward, I think, but I do believe it captures the feedback that we've been hearing from all of those sources, which we just covered. And then to make it a little more detailed, we would, underneath that vision statement, place a few goals, and these are also in the draft form. But we think these goals help to sharpen and make a little more specific the vision statement. So we're looking to leverage new investment to create substantial improvements on North Main Street, strengthen the corridor as a contributor to diversifying the town's tax base, balance new investments so as many stakeholders as possible see positive outcomes, increase the continuity and cohesiveness of North Main Street through building and landscape design, and celebrate the history of North Main Street while embracing the variety and rhythm of variation on the corridor. So we think these make the vision statement itself more tangible and more specific. And then the vision statement and these goals would be a part of framing the zoning recommendations and other recommendations that we put forward, which we'll get into in the next section of this presentation. But first, what we wanted to do was just get your reaction to that initial vision statement and the goals. So I'll just skip back to the vision statement so it can be on the screen. And then open up another poll. So you can just let us know how this struck you initially. And you can also feel free, if you'd like, to put a thought in the chat as well. Okay, let me launch this poll. All right, so it has two questions. The first question is, they're both reactions to the material I just showed you, the vision statement and the goals. First, do you feel the draft vision statement is about right for North Main Street? Your options are, yes, it looks good. It's okay, but could be refined. It needs work and is missing key ideas, or no, it's not the right vision in your mind. And then the second is regarding the goals, and then you get the same options. So do you feel the draft goals are about right for North Main Street? And yes, they look good, or they are okay, but could be refined, or they need work and are missing key ideas, or no, it's not the right set of goals. So you can see the vision statement still on the screen. I'll shift to the goals in a moment. I see a question in the chat from John. What is the history of North Main Street? Yeah, so the history shows up in a few ways. There are historic structures on North Main Street. The history of North Main Street in general terms was that it was a factory and mill area with mill housing or factory housing, a little bit different than some of the other parts of town. And that some of those historic structures are still there. There's the Massachusetts Cultural Resources Inventory has several surveyed properties. I forget the exact number, but there's a substantial amount of historic properties which have been surveyed along the corridor. And so those could be potentially built into and featured in future investment. And I think that question's a fair one. And I think it's also an opportunity to think about what is the narrative of the history of North Main Street, and how could that narrative and story of the history of North Main Street be communicated through these investments and through the public realm? So are there actual stories that could be told through plaques or other components of the built environment? So that I think is a great question. All right, so I said I would skip to the other goals. So here are the goals. Looks like we only have about 40% of people who have voted so far. So if you could vote, that would be great. Helps us understand how people are feeling about this draft information. You can see the draft goals on the screen. So another question, what percentage of residential versus business in the 43 parcels? Hank, I don't believe I'm going to be able to answer that off the cuff. In the previous presentation, we did go through a more detailed mapping of the land uses in the North Main Street corridor, and we could share that. I think actually Yolando has shared the link to that YouTube video, so that there you'd actually see a visual depiction of the land use as a part of that presentation. I think you may have been present in the last meeting. So I will not try to answer that very specifically. I apologize for that in this session. And a question just about the boundaries of North Main Street. Yes, so North Main Street in this case is looking at from the intersection with Skillings Road up to the city of Woburn. That's what the extent of the parcels we're looking at. And it includes parcels, basically parcels with frontage on North Main Street, because we're talking about the General Business District 2 and General Business District 3 zoning designations, but it does not include every single parcel with frontage along North Main Street in that area. All right, so I think I've talked long enough and filled enough time that I can close this. We only ended up with 67% of participants voting, so please do try to vote in the other opportunities, but I'll share those results for you. And the results that we're seeing for the vision statement, the majority thought that it looked okay, but could be refined and improved. And then 42% said, yes, it looks good. So it looks like we're headed in the right direction. It could be improved, and we're happy to either through the chat, or if you want to take some time with it and send us an email about how how you could see the statement being improved, we'd be happy to take the feedback. And then similarly for the goals, well, it looks like the goals fared a little bit better. So 50%, the majority said that yes, they look good. 33% said they are okay, but could be refined. And then 17% said they need work and are missing key ideas. So please do put your thoughts in the chat if you have some ideas about what's missing or how they could be improved. We will definitely take a look at all that information. But in the interest of our tight time and how much information I know I want to share this evening, we are going to keep moving along as opposed to having a verbal discussion about it at this moment. So I apologize if that feels a little abrupt, but I did want to get into this portion of the presentation as well, which is about defining the specific recommendations. And most of these are framed as zoning recommendations, with some of them being design standard recommendations as well. There are 15 of them, and I will be going through them in some decent detail this evening, but we will be kind of skipping along the surface a little bit, because I just wanted to get an initial set of recommendations out to you all and get your initial reaction to them. You can see the breadth and sort of range of topics that are covered in these recommendations. I would cluster them in one sort of significant way. And that, based upon what we're hearing and heard and what I think is represented in the goals and the vision statement, we're really trying to seek a balance here. And the way I view that balance is around encouraging investment, but also making sure that that investment is aligned with the community's desires and goals. So I think these 15 recommendations do strike that balance. And so the first 8, which we'll be going through, I would frame is in that classification of encouraging investment. And then I think that the last 7 are actually about balancing that encouragement and aligning the investment with what the community wants to see and what its ambitions and vision are for North Main Street. So hopefully you'll see how that plays out a little bit. We're going to ask you just a little bit of a preview. For each of these recommendations, you'll have a poll pop up quickly, and then you can respond to it if you think this is a good idea in terms of its individual recommendation or not. And we previewed them all together because I do view them a little bit as a set. I think we definitely, as a set of initial recommendations, have flexibility. We can certainly and will certainly modify based upon your feedback this evening. But I will just give you this caution as you think through your response and reaction to the meeting this evening. I don't think it's the case that we can, for example, say, we don't like any of the first 8, which are about encouraging investment, and we like all the second set of 7, which are about aligning the investment. I think you need some of each of them. You might not need 8 and 7. It might be 6 and 6. It might be 5 and 5. But I think they're all good ideas, and there is a balance that needs to be struck between these 2 sets. So again, these are applying to the official zoning map of the GBD2 and GBD3. That's the intention here. And then there's also the Village Center Overlay District, which does apply mostly to GBD3 and GBD2 parcels, but it does also include some neighboring residential parcels as well. You can see I won't dwell on this, but this is an example from the current zoning table of dimensional regulations about what is required in GBD2 and GBD3. And then for really the rest of the presentation, I'm going to be using this diagram template to help walk you through illustratively. Still don't think I got that right. Illustratively, there you go, maybe that's better. To show you in diagrams what we're trying to get at in terms of the zoning concepts, and it's a little easier to think about it with a picture than the words. So here you see a typical on the screen building lot in North Main Street. And this is on the west side of North Main Street. So on average, the west side of North Main Street has a parcel which is 100 feet wide at its frontage on North Main Street and 110 feet deep. So that's what you see there with the building and lot parcel. That's the average size. On the east side of North Main Street, it is marginally larger. So you've got 110 feet wide by 120 feet deep. Still about the same though. For the purpose of these illustrations, we're going to stick with the west side of North Main Street, those typical dimensions. Here you see visually the current zoning setbacks, which are defined. So you have a 10-foot minimum front setback or a 15-foot maximum front setback in the GBD2. That maximum does not occur in the GBD3. In both, you have a minimum 15-foot rear setback, and side setbacks are not required. So that's the existing zoning today. And I just wanted to share with you a little bit of an example of how a typical redevelopment might occur on those properties. So there's always variation, of course, but in my experience, you see mixed use development occur in a range of sizes, which is pretty standard. And that range is mostly related to the depth of the building. So that's the 60 to 75 foot dimension that you see that we put on this diagram. So most typically, mixed use development where you have a non-residential commercial ground floor that might have a retailer or a shop or a restaurant of some kind with upper story residential uses falls in that range of a 60 to 75 foot building depth. And then the width of the building itself would vary based upon the property's constraints. In this case, we're showing an 80-foot width on the property, on that typical property. So that's a pretty standard building size. Also, parking comes in very standard building sizes. The size of a parking lot is mandated by the zoning code in your town, the zoning bylaw, excuse me. And then typically also just as an industry standard, even with variations in parking sizes, the overall dimension of a double loaded parking bay with a two-way intersection and travel aisle is 60 feet. So you see that 60 feet shown here. And then on the typical size of a building lot in North Main Street, you see that a typical parking lot and a typical building footprint don't fit. So that's a real issue for redevelopment opportunities. And you can see the overlap there that we've marked, and you've got about 22 feet of building which don't overlap. So what does that look like in real life? Here's an example of an overlapping parking and building configuration in Swampscott. where you have parking that needed to fit on the same space effectively as the building footprint. And so you see interesting and inventive ways to make those two things work together, where you pull the building up, but you still have some part of the building which touches the ground, of course, because you have to have vertical circulation, which gets you up into the building. And then you have parking, which occurs underneath the building footprint and to the rear of it. So this is just kind of the reality of the parcel constraints and geometry here and how redevelopment occurs. And so our initial recommendation is to simply allow flexibility for setbacks under specific conditions. And those conditions would be related to the parcel size, related to the development proposal, but it would provide a pathway for encroachment into those setbacks where it's needed to provide a necessary building and parking layout. And that would all be through a special permit, that set of allowing this encroachment to happen. So in the previous meeting, we asked more generally, are buildings set back from the street an appropriate distance on North Main Street? And this was the response that we received, that some people thought they could be smaller, some people thought they could be larger, some people thought they were about right, but it wasn't really definitive, the feedback here in a general sense. So in a more specific sense, we'd like to get your feedback on that first idea of allowing by special permit flexibility to have buildings as necessary move into those setbacks as they are currently defined. Oops, sorry, I never stopped sharing the results from the previous poll. Try to do that so it gets out of your way. And so here is the poll for this, and it simply asks, would you support the recommendation to decrease setbacks under certain circumstances to increase development flexibility? Then you get options that yes, maybe, no, or the very quick overview, which I just provided you, is not enough information. All right, so thank you for responding so quickly in this case. I will try to keep these moving along, so I appreciate everyone being quick on the button here. So we've got 82%, 85%, that looks pretty good. So I'll close this poll, share the results real quick. So it looks like 59% would support this recommendation of allowing that flexibility to occur to help with that circumstance of it just not being able to fit in certain circumstances where, depending on the parcel size. Some parcels, of course, are large enough and some parcels are not. And then we also have 21% that say maybe and 21% that say no. So I'll stop sharing that. Okay, so now is moving on to the second idea. And this is relative to the same issue. So another solution to that problem would be to allow lot assembly under specific conditions. And so this would increase the flexibility and feasibility for site layout and development by allowing you to combine a parcel which is to the rear, potentially, of the parcel which has frontage on North Main Street. In most cases, I would say that that other parcel is probably not zoned in the GBD2 or GBD3. So it would be a residentially zoned parcel. And so it's not right in all circumstances, I grant that, but it could be right in some circumstances, and it could offer additional viability for the situation which we're describing, to get enough room on a parcel to place both a surface parking lot and a building footprint that are not overlapping. So that's what we're showing here. So we're adding, in this case, to make our diagram work, we've had to add about 57 feet, which would be potentially, maybe not even the entire portion of an adjacent parcel, but a part of that adjacent parcel. And that gets you your building footprint and your parking area without an overlap. So let's now see what the reaction is to this second idea. Let me bring up the poll here for you all. So that it's same format, and you'll see this format for the rest of the recommendations really. So would you support the recommendation to allow lot assembly under specific circumstances to increase redevelopment flexibility? And of course, we'll have to add more detail around what those parameters are, how that review could take place. But just as an initial idea, what we're trying to get a sense for is if everyone really doesn't like an idea, then there's not much sense in trying to refine it and get it right if it's just going to be an issue. It's like we only have 68% voting at this point, so please do try to get your thoughts in. It's very helpful. We have 38 participants in the meeting at this point, so our numbers have grown some. So thank you for everyone who's joined us along the way. It's great to have a good amount of audience to get this feedback. So we're at 75% now. So just another few seconds to give us your feedback. All right, now end this poll. Share back to you. So 44% was the leading answer with yes, I would support this recommendation, followed by 30% at maybe, 19% at no, and 7% at needing more information. So it looks like the first two ideas have decent support. Now let's move on to the next topic. I think this one is relatively, to me, straightforward, but I don't think it is currently defined in the zoning, and I think it's important enough that it really needs to be defined. And that's really just making very clear the importance of North Main Street frontage, that we want the front and primary facade of a building in the future to be related to and directly oriented to North Main Street, that we don't want a building which is relating to a side street, for example. We don't want a building which is doing something else, and just need to spell that out very clearly, that we want the building's front to be at the North Main Street frontage, and that also we want the parking to be behind that building. So there is some language currently in the zoning bylaw today about parking to the rear of the front plane of the building, and I think that we could strengthen that language. So let me pull up the poll for this straightforward idea. So would you support the recommendation to define the orientation of the building to North Main Street? And I just realized this one, in my own classification that I just went over with you all at the very beginning, it got lumped in with the encouraging investment, but I would probably say that this one is about aligning the investment to what we want it to be. It's not so much about, it doesn't cost anything to do this, it's just making clear the intentions and the vision. So 70% have voted. Give just another second to click that button. All right, that got us a few more percentages, so I'll be happy with that. Let me just share the results to you. So a vast majority on this one, so I'm glad you all agree that this is a relative no-brainer, that 81% think that, yes, I would support this recommendation, 15% maybe, but they need to know more about it, and 4% are no, I would not support this recommendation. All right. And I am not in the meeting. I'm sorry, I'm trying to go through this quickly. So I'm not tracking the comments in the chat, but please do put your comments in the chat, and we will sort through them after the meeting and get all of your ideas and thoughts as we're going through this. So let's just move along. So the next one might not be as straightforward, but I think it's also important. And that's allowing or requiring side parking access. So in not every case, but in many cases, there are parcels which have both frontage along North Main Street and access to one of the residential side streets. And I know that that's a sensitive subject, but you can see in the diagram how much more efficient access from a side street would be than access from the Main Street frontage. And what happens is you'd impact the building with the access from the frontage, and you'd actually reduce the amount of parking which is achievable. Where you can attach a side access where possible and appropriate, and we can put parameters around where that appropriate location may be. It just makes it work out so much better and makes the invitation to investment so much easier. So I know that this is potentially a difficult idea for many of you, because we saw that the majority of our audience this evening is a resident on an abutting side street. So this could potentially be a direct impact, but you can also see the trade-off that occurs when the access isn't allowed. So let's just see what your reaction is to that. And so would you support this recommendation, which is our fourth so far? And so would you support the recommendation to allow or require side parking access to increase redevelopment efficiency? And so again, we're putting these all forward as ideas, again, to encourage that investment to occur. And it is a balance, we understand. And then we would be adding more detail potentially around the circumstances which we think this is appropriate. So it looks like 71% have voted. Give just a couple more seconds for people to respond to the poll. All right, let me share this back with you. So it looks like our leading response was, yes, I would support. Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned this during the voting, but I broke this into two yeses. So the first is a more extreme yes, where you would support requiring side access. Only 17% thought requiring was the right approach. And then the second was a little softer yes, which is you would allow side access, which was the more frequent response at 43%. And then 9% at maybe, 22% at no, and 9% at need more information. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic. And it looks like we're just trying to gauge my timing here. I think what I'm trying to do is get to a point where we have some moments at the end for discussion. It looks like we will get there. So I apologize for this being such a one-way conversation. The next is zoning height as the topic. What you see on the screen is the current zoning requirements around height. So the maximum height is 45 feet. The maximum number of stories is 3 stories. You can see in the simple diagram, we've divided it across the 3 floors, and that makes pretty sizable floor-to-floor heights, 15-foot floor-to-floor heights. If you look at that in the context of North Main Street today, it is a larger floor-to-floor height and a larger overall building envelope than you can see with the context. We've drawn the surrounding context in this diagram pretty close to accurate to some of the buildings that occur. They may be, off by a foot or two, but this is a pretty good representation of that relationship of height. We asked in a previous meeting about the general terms around building height. What is an appropriate height for North Main Street? Most people responded 2 to 3 stories. Some more people than others responded 3 to 4 stories, and then that was followed by 4 or more stories or 1 or 2 stories. So we have a initial recommendation here, which I think is is a good one and is encouraging of investment, and I think helps to address the floor-to-floor height concerns. So if you increase the maximum height by stories, but not by feet, and you only make it the allowed height 3.5 stories, and a half story is defined, we can define it as a story that is built into the pitch of a roof. So the half is effectively that you can't, as it's built into the pitch of the roof, you can't get a fully occupied 4th floor. So it's really a half floor built into the eaves that you're getting in the dormers. But once you do that, and if you maintain the 45-foot height maximum, which is already in existence in the zoning today, you actually shrink together those other floor-to-floor heights and bring them more in alignment with the context and character of North Main Street today. So I think this is actually, in my mind, a win-win, where you both encourage development by offering a little more buildable area and rentable area, and by bringing the overall scale and look and feel of a new building in alignment with the context of the corridor today. And there you can see the same context at the same heights that we've drawn them previously. With the pitched roof and the modified floor-to-floor heights, it does actually feel a little more contextual than it did previously. So your thoughts on this initial recommendation number 5? Would you support the recommendation to increase the maximum building height to 3.5 stories? That increases redevelopment feasibility, among other things. And I will just note as a preview, one of our design standards that you'll see in another initial recommendation in a few moments is to actually require a pitched roof. A pitched roof is currently not required, so a flat roof can occur at that height today, which does allow you to get some large floor-to-floor heights. So 75% have voted. I'm going to go ahead and end that. I'll share the results. So really a lot of the vast majority, 72%, said, yes, I would support this recommendation. 16% are at maybe, but they need to know more. 8% at no, and 4% needing more information. All right, so thank you for that. And then the next is a topic which is sometimes more complicated than height, but is related to it, and that's the building density. So the building density is measured in the zoning bylaw today by the floor area ratio, FAR, and that's basically dividing the total building area by the total lot area for any lot. And so you can see that calculation here on our diagram. Our diagram shows a total lot area of 16,700 square feet. Those 3 floors are 5,670 square feet per floor. You've got 3 of them, that equals 17,010 square feet of building area. And then if you divide that out, you get an FAR, which is that ratio of 1.02. An FAR of 1 is what's allowed in the district today. So this all works out accordingly. Again, in general terms, last meeting, we asked about the appropriate density for North Main Street. Most people thought more density than there is today would be appropriate, 49%. So if you make that change in the height allowed, it would actually give you an additional half story of floor area, which could be counted towards the FAR, and it would bump the FAR up to about a 1.2 or 1.19 to be exact on those calculations in the diagram. So we would suggest that the FAR, the baseline FAR, be increased to a maximum of 1.20 to be consistent with this diagram. And I should also note, actually, I don't think I noted, our diagramming from this point forward is actually using the modified lot that we showed from the second initial recommendation, where we actually have expanded the lot so that the parking can coexist without overlapping with the building footprint. So I just wanted to make that note for you all. So let's get your feedback on increasing density. So would you support the recommendation to increase maximum density to an FAR of 1.20 and increase redevelopment feasibility? Again, we're trying to offer more possibilities, more potential for revenue, more potential for leasable and rentable space or saleable space. And while our diagram is not the only circumstance, of course, that's occurring in the corridor, our diagram is using real dimensions and real calculations. So the lessons that we're learning from this typical situation, I think are applicable. We can test them in a few other ways, but the numbers we're putting forward, I think, are realistic. All right, so we've got 78% now. I'll share the results to you all. 54% are yes, they would support the recommendations. 31% are at maybe, 8% are at no, and another 8% are at needing more information. Okay. So you cannot have a discussion about density on a property without also a discussion about parking. And so presently, based upon the parking requirements of the town's bylaw, you would have, and you can see the calculations to the right of our illustration. You'd have potentially 14 spaces required for the ground floor if it were a retail space, 8 spaces required for the upper level, second story, if it were 4 housing units, which we think is reasonable. And 4 additional units at that third floor would be another 8 parking spaces. So you'd have a total of 30 parking spaces required to support that box which we've drawn. As you can see, the diagram that we have for the parking area shows only 18 parking spaces at this point. So to get 30 parking spaces on the property, again, you're going to have to overlap the building and the parking area, or you're going to have to do other more expensive ways to get more parking on your property, such as tucking parking underneath the building footprint, building a parking deck, which is probably pretty unrealistic, and other gymnastics. That one exception to that is the overlay district, the Village Center Overlay District, VCOD, does have a more relaxed parking requirement for the ground floor space. So instead of 1 space per 400 square feet, it's 1 space per 1,200 square feet, which would bring that parking requirement down to 5, which would mean it is only 21 parking spaces required, which is almost in alignment with the diagram that we're showing. So here you see some of those parking requirements that are in the bylaw today for other uses, and they go on for all the uses, really. And here's just a little bit more about the Village Center Overlay District. We also asked about parking in general terms last meeting. And this was similar to the setback responses, where it's a little indeterminate, but the most frequent responses were less parking than currently provided, the same amount as currently provided, followed shortly thereafter by more parking than is currently required or provided. And so hopefully not surprising if you're piecing all this together, but we would advocate for and recommend reducing the parking requirements to increase flexibility on the property. So this would be reducing the requirements for the ground floor uses and for residential uses, and to allow an additional shared parking reduction, which is in the language of the bylaw today, but I think we can elevate that and potentially clarify it. So in this case, what we recommend is reducing the residential from 2 parking spaces per unit to 1.5 parking spaces per unit. And that would bring those top 2 floors down to 6 parking spaces required for each. And to go ahead and use the VCOD ground floor requirement of 1 space per 1,200 square feet, which would bring that down to 5. So that brings you in alignment with the diagram that we're showing, which would be 17 required parking spaces. And then if you allowed a 15% shared parking reduction on top of that, it would bring it down to 14 required parking spaces. And that is potentially useful for some of the landscape and open space improvements that we're going to be asking for in a few recommendations as well. So by reducing the amount of parking, we're increasing the amount of flexibility for other things. Parking, of course, is not free. There's many studies which show that the provision of parking, surface parking and free parking for uses encourages car ownership, encourages traffic, and encourages the use of automobiles. The other reason parking is not free is the economic concept of opportunity cost. If you use the land for parking, it cannot be used for other things. Sometimes those other things are more valuable to the community or more valuable to development than parking. So those are all the reasons, among others, why parking is not free and needs to be considered carefully. So would you support that recommendation of decreasing the required parking for a project to increase redevelopment flexibility and feasibility? Yeah, I was trying to catch up with some of the chatting a little bit. And so yes, the assumption a lot of these diagrams are based upon at this moment is the what is correctly characterized in the chat as the lukewarm response to potentially assembling properties, which would be a portion of a property to the rear potentially of a non-GBD2 or GBD3 parcel. We will revisit these recommendations and the diagrams which we would put with our recommendations to potentially make some modifications. And so some of these ideas, I think the reduction of parking overall becomes even more important if the community is less willing to consider an expansion of the building lot. So with that, looks like most people have answered. %67% support, yes. 19% maybe, 15% no. Looks like we had provided enough information for everyone on that one. All right, we're a little over halfway through these, so thank you for just trucking along with us. The next is in regard to the use regulations, and we have some minor suggestions around the use regulations. Today, well, it looks like my subtitle there is still from the parking, so that just ignore that, but this is more about the use regulations. Today, a combination of business and residential uses requires a special permit. So you see that highlighted here. Also allowed by right is the outdoor parking of commercial vehicles, which to me does not seem consistent with the vision which has been articulated in draft form or the goals. And that also occurs in the GBD2, where a combination of business and residential use is allowed by special permit. We asked about the uses in the previous meeting, again, in general terms. And the use most people would like to see more of is mixed use with residential and businesses, 23%, or small outdoor spaces, another 23%. And then what would people like to see less of? Auto services, repair, and fuel. Although we did see some comments at the previous meeting that some people find those services very useful and like walking to them. So in order to increase the predictability of desired uses, we think that it's important to move that combination of business and residential uses to be permitted as of right. And that a lot of the other recommendations that we're making would be the ones that are requiring a special permit. So it's not saying that we would move all of these conditions to as of right, but that the core use that you're trying to encourage and desire on the corridor should be made as of right, and people should have a certain sense of guarantee that that's the type of use that the community wants, and that's what we're hearing. So I would put the special permit onto some of the other feasibility recommendations, but not onto the core use itself. And then we can also clean up that one parking of outdoor commercial vehicles was the other incongruity we found. So here's the poll. Would you support modification to have business and residential uses permitted as of right to increase the predictability of redevelopment? Okay, we've hit the 70% threshold, which I've seen has been about typical. Thank you all for getting those votes in. So 54%, yes, I would support this recommendation. 31% maybe, 8% no, 8% I don't know, need more information. So thank you for continuing with this series. So next, we're now shifting into that alignment of the investments with the community's goals and vision. So next is about the building design requirements. And we will continue to add more to this set. But first, there are not really presently in the bylaw requirements in the GBD2 or GBD3 for the roof form. There is a little bit about the parking location, about the orientation to the street, and other things. We asked, there was a lot of items which you're all very interested in having design guidelines about on North Main Street. So these can be features of the work. I would suggest that some of these are important enough to become design standards, which would be part of the zoning bylaw. Design guidelines are usually a companion to the bylaw itself and not mandatory. They are guidance. They are not obligated to follow that. So a few of the items which I think should be in that realm of standards, which are required, and then would be supplemented by some of the additional topics you all highlighted in the previous meeting. The pitched roof, I think, is a big one. I think requiring a pitched roof is a way to make consistent the aesthetics of North Main Street and make it more consistent with some of the historic structures which remain and the residential character of the abutting streets. The articulation of that roof through dormers, gable ends, chimneys, other ways to break down a large roof mass, I think should be required also. The articulation of the facades so that there are bay windows, bump outs, pushing and pulling of the building form and massing so that it's not just one large building volume, I think are required. There is some discussion today in the bylaw about a base, middle, and top of the building. The base should be further defined and differentiated from the upper portions of the structure. And then the entry and window pattern, I think we can put some language around that as well to make sure that you're getting results in terms of the investments which you want to see in terms of their aesthetics and attractiveness for the corridor. So are those, just that initial flavor, the types of things that you would like to see? In particular, I think what I would also frame this question as is focused on the pitched roof requirement. So if you do not like the pitched roof requirement, then I would suggest that you do not show support for this. But if you do like the pitched roof requirement, I would suggest you do support. All right, looks like we just got it all. So, all right, sharing it back to you, 67%. Yes, I would support this recommendation, 19% need, maybe 11% no, and then 4% needing more information. All right, so we're rounding the corner on these. So next is streetscape and landscape requirements. Today, there are not really too many streetscape and landscape requirements. There's a 4-foot wide strip at the rear of the property, particularly if it abuts a parking lot, to conceal the glare from vehicular headlights. There are no landscape requirements for small parking lots, but once you get over 21 parking spaces, a 2% interior parking landscape area is required. The front yard is required to either be landscaped or paved as a patio area. There are no street tree requirements. Garage doors cannot be located on the front wall of the building. So those are the things that I found. And I would recommend a few items to get more greenery and specifically more shade trees into the North Main Street area. First is requiring street trees at a minimum of 1 every 40 feet for the frontage of the property that is being improved. And this could either be in the form of a landscape bump out that would add additional space. It might remove an on-street parking space, but it would add additional space for landscape. Or it could take place in the form of a tree grate built into the sidewalk, which may necessitate a widening of the sidewalk to allow for accessibility. Also, I would suggest increasing the amount of landscaped parking area from 2% to 5% and requiring interior landscaping with shade trees. And that a similar requirement for shade trees at the rear property line, 1 every 40 feet would occur. And that, just a side note, all the green area shown in this diagram is 4,000 square feet, which is about 24% of the overall lot area. So that's another approach. Currently, there is no percentage requirement of landscape area in the GBD2 or GBD3. But based upon our analysis, we could introduce a minimum requirement by percentage of the total lot area. 24% is probably ambitious, too high, but it could be a requirement which we think is reaching towards that level of ambition, so that you have a certain standard of greenery that occurs in landscape that will occur on the property. So what about this set of increased landscape requirements? Would you support this type of approach? Great, thank you all for jumping on that one so quickly. So I've ended that one pretty quick too. So 78% believe that they would, yes, support that recommendation, 11% maybe, 11% no. So thank you for that. We're almost here to the end. So next is a similar approach to pedestrian safety requirements. Presently, there are no requirements for a property to contribute to pedestrian safety around that property. Obviously, the sentiment for those improvements is there, that they are needed. People want to see them. And I do believe as part of the zoning, you can require and it would be appropriate to require pedestrian improvements contributions from a investment, from a redevelopment property, to the immediate adjacent circumstances around that property. So that might be sidewalk improvements. It might be improving a crossing. It might be adding a new crossing if that's appropriate. It might be restriping, adding a flashing beacon, adding a curb extension. And of course, that would be based upon the circumstances around the property. It might include also adding a Shero or some other bike amenity. So those would be required, but would also be, there would be some, not some generality to it, because it would be based upon the specific circumstances around the property, but it would be framed as a requirement that needs to be reviewed. So what is your thought? Oops, sorry, did that wrong. So what is your thought about adding those into the bylaw as a set of requirements to advance pedestrian safety in the corridor and bicycle safety in the corridor? And that's not to say that this is the only way improvements for bicycle and pedestrian safety may occur. There are, of course, investments the town can be making, studies the town can be making, follow up with the town engineering, complete streets programs, MassWorks grants, all of those things. But this, I think, gives you another avenue for incremental improvement on the corridor. So thank you for that. And the results. %, yes, they would support the recommendation. 20% are at a maybe. There's a little more information needed. And then open space requirements follow a similar vein, where today there just are no open space requirements by percentage or other means, really. And the addition of open spaces was one of the uses people wanted to see more of as the most. So the recommendation here is similar to the pedestrian improvements, and that would be to require the contribution through the private investment to expand a network of plazas and pocket parks throughout the North Main Street corridor. And that would be requiring a small percentage of publicly accessible plaza or pocket park space to be designed with the site and building design of that property. So it might be a small plaza at the entry, it might be a landscape seating area, however it could work out with the development program and the layout. In this case, what we're showing on that lined front area, which is a plaza, is about 3.8%. So, it could be somewhere in the neighborhood of a 4% requirement or a 3% requirement for a publicly accessible space. And I don't think that would be overly onerous. A pocket park is just a phrase for a smaller park. So this is a modest park, which would have real benefit as a smaller area for people to have a place to relax, have a place to eat outdoors. It could be connected to the building program and be of quite good value to the property itself and to the corridor. So here's the poll for that. So would you support the increase of required open space as part of the development requirements? All right, we've hit our 70% mark. So 68% thought that was also a good idea, 16% maybe, and 16% no. So thank you again for your quick response on all these. The next is about historic preservation. So the town has a demolition delay bylaw, which provides some protection, but of course is not the ultimate answer, because after the delay, a property can still be demolished. There aren't necessarily preservation incentives that are built into the GBD2 or GBD3 today. And as I did mention in a response to an earlier chat question, there are Macris historic surveyed properties, which could be, which is available. We mapped them in a previous diagram in the last meeting, and that could be used to show and identify properties which may be eligible for a historic preservation incentive in the district. The CBD does have incentives, which we could model this upon. So they waive special permit or variance requirements for restoring building elements, including floors, and waiving the requirement of any additional parking. So I thought I'd float this one by you all to see what your reaction is to it. But I think you could go a step farther with an incentive for historic preservation in the North Main Street corridor. And that would be allowing a addition of a similarly dense property, the density of a property that we're outlining in these zoning characteristics, with a historic structure, and that you would encourage the preservation of that structure and allow the addition to still be as dense, but not require the maximum, the parking requirements that would be needed to support it. So you're basically saying, save the building, build what you can fit on your property, and we're not going to be as concerned about the other requirements because we're most focused on preserving that great building and having you still have an economically viable redevelopment project. So it's more about the building area than the other components of that property. But I think that the benefit there is the potential that you would actually have a more powerful incentive for preservation in the corridor. But you all might not think so. So I'm interested to see how you react to that idea. Let's see how that goes right now. So would you support the recommendation to increase what is allowed when a redevelopment preserves a historic structure as part of the redevelopment? And what I didn't mention on the previous slide, and I'll mention here as we get the votes in, is that the addition could be structured around the guidelines which have been put forward by the Secretary of Interior's preservation standards around additions and new construction. And they make very clear some guidance around how a new addition should be secondary to the historic structure, be complementary to the historic structure, and have other characteristics which would help it to fit with the historic structure which is being preserved. So there are precedents and guidance to make this type of thing a successful project. So it looks like we're almost to our 70% threshold where I usually say end. So thank you for getting those last votes on. Great. It's a little more mixed on this one. So 48%, yes, I would support this recommendation. 32% maybe, but need to know a little bit more about it. 8% no, and 12% need a lot more information. I'm just not sure about what's going on with that idea. All right, so we're getting really close to our time, so just get these last two in. Then the affordable housing requirement would be similar. Today you have an incentive built in where you're allowed to go from 1 FAR to 1.25 if you have 15% affordable dwelling units. Most people think that having more affordable units required in the corridor is a good thing, 45% at 15%. And I would suggest, because we're increasing the overall, potentially increasing the overall height to 3.5 stories and the overall density to go along with that to 1.2, it makes the 1.25 incentive for affordable housing, undercuts that incentive. So I think we should make a commensurate elevation of the affordable housing incentive to move that up to 1.40 FAR. And that 1.40 FAR would align with a full 4-story structure. And I think you could achieve that by not going too much farther in terms of the building height. But if you give about another 5 feet, move it up to 50 feet total, you could get a more usable 4th floor. So it's probably a little more, it's closer to 4 stories than it is 3.5 stories in terms of usable area on that, in that roof peaked top floor. And this would potentially drive more incentive towards that affordable housing requirement. But I also understand there was some reluctance and not as much support for moving to 4 stories. So I want to see where that balance and tipping point is in terms of who would like to see that trade-off, and if you think it's an appropriate incentive. So let's do that. Here's the second to last, or I guess the almost got one extra poll up there. And I apologize, with the planning board meeting starting at 8:30, it just looks like we had a little bit too of a packed meeting in terms of content. So I don't think we're going to get to have much of a chance to discuss. So in that case, I do invite you to reach out to us by email or follow-up phone call, and we can have additional continuation of this conversation with you. And Yolando, if you wouldn't mind, if you could also put my email address in the chat so people could have that too. Thank you. All right, so 79% have responded. The results are 41% would like to see that, and that was tied with the no. So 41% both for yes and no, with 15% in the maybe category. So this is the most, I think, right down the line in terms of yes and no responses. So thank you for that. We'll be exploring this a little bit more and seeing how affordable housing can balance, get the appropriate incentives so that it's still a part of the mix here. And then lastly, is the stewardship of all of these recommendations in potentially a revised set of zoning circumstances for the corridor. The current special permit granting authority is the Zoning Board of Appeals. And we think there would be a reasonable modification given the stewardship for a process such as this, the closeness of the planning board to this process and its recommendations, to change that special permit granting authority to the planning board to have the stewardship and oversight that they could provide as projects come through with these new set of recommendations potentially. That's of course assuming that they would go to town meeting and be passed the town meeting. So a few steps between here and there, but then they would be the stewards of this moving forward. So would you support that type of change? So that's what's on the screen for you now with the poll. The recommendation to modify the special permit granting authority to be the planning board for North Main Street as opposed to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Okay, I'm really getting down to my last minutes here, so I'm going to go a little quicker. So at 65%, yes, they would support this, and 12% maybe, 15% no. All right, and then I did want to do one last poll, which so we've gone through all of the recommendations and touched on each of them. You've gotten a feel for what this looks like. And I wanted to ask a question overall about the entire initial set of recommendations. Just how do you feel? And this is helpful because we didn't get a chance yet to discuss them and hear your comments, but this will help give us a shorthand for what you're thinking about all of this together. And so do you think this initial recommendations fits with the needs for North Main Street overall? Is it very close to what needs to happen? Is it close? Is it okay? Is it not close? Or are we way off? Are we very far off in terms of what our thinking is for what should be happening here and how the recommendations should be shaping up? Great. All right, so thank you. Just hit that 70% marker. So it looks like we're thankfully not way off, but we could stand to do some refinement and improvement to get more of you into the very close or close range. So we will continue to look at the comments you provided this evening, review the results, and oh, sorry, I didn't share that, and get this, continue to build upon this as a foundation of the recommendations. Just before you all shift over to your planning board meeting and agenda, I did want to give you a feel for the next steps in this process. So we will be continuing to refine these recommendations, again, building upon your feedback, the feedback that we get, maybe with some subsequent conversations and digging through the chat information you provided this evening and reactions. We'll draft a report with the recommendations, present those recommendations back to the planning board, June, maybe at the end of this month or the beginning of the next month. And then have a bit of public comment period on that draft report and recommendations. And then work with the planning board will continue to discuss potential town meeting zoning warrants, and additional community meetings will be a part of that process. So there will be a continued conversation around all of this, but it seems like from this evening that we have a pretty solid footing in terms of where this is all headed, and I think have a lot of good information to build upon. So we really do thank you for bearing with us in what was a really overloaded meeting, but we had a lot to communicate to you and get your initial reaction to. So if you have other questions, please do reach out to us. I'd be happy to speak with you all by phone or have an email conversation if that's easier. But we do want to make sure that we get to have some additional conversation, although we didn't get a chance to this evening. So with that, I appreciate that. Brian, I don't know if you have some instructions to get people transported into your planning board meeting. Oh, sorry, I think I need to allow you to unmute yourself.
Hi there, thanks. Thanks for that, Josh. That was really packed. I can put in the chat the link for our planning board meeting, but I was gonna log off in just a second. I'm gonna put this in the chat right now to get on over to our regular planning board meeting. But I wanted to thank everybody for coming, and I also, in addition to emailing Josh, you can always email the planning department or the planning board at planningboard@winchester.us. So thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to sign off here and give it back to Josh.
Thank you, Brian. And again, a hearty thanks to all of you for bearing with us this evening on what typically is not this packed of a meeting. We apologize for not giving everyone a chance to offer your own perspectives, but please do offer them in other ways. And we will post the recording for this meeting and the information that we presented with the other presentation on the town website and make that into a YouTube video for you all. And we really do appreciate it, and enjoy your planning board meeting and enjoy your evening. So thank you very much.
Okay. You let everyone in, Brian. That was very quick.
Everyone is in.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Welcome to the June 8th, 2021 Planning Board meeting of the town of Winchester. I am David Jurius, Chair. We have with us from the Planning Board, Eaching Scott and Sally Dale. And we are hoping to be joined by Heather Hannon. And our newest member, Cheryl Wolf, will unfortunately not be able to join us. We have a very tight schedule this evening, so I will be asking people to stick to the time slots that I'm going to give them. So we're going to be talking, we're going to be having a presentation on 10 Converse Place by Ian Gillespie and Company and Ad Miliora. We will then have a couple of petitions going for the ZBA that we will be discussing. We will then discuss how we are going to put together the Master Plan Implementation Committee. After that, we will have a discussion on whether or how the Planning Board will respond to the referendum to put the land development agreement about the Waterfield lot, either to keep it as it is or to withdraw the motion that was approved by town meeting. And that is it. So at this point, why don't we hand control? Brian, do you have anything you want to say before we jump into Converse Place?
No, I think we should move forward with the, even though it says 8:30 to 9:30 here, I think that you had said that the goal was maybe to give the floor to them for 45 or 50 minutes and then open up to the planning board for 10 or 15. Was that?
Yeah, I wanted to do that. I just realized that we did have a question that hopefully we'll get to the end if Heather joins us, which is to discuss whether we should reschedule our next meeting, which falls on the same date as the special election. And typically the planning board does not meet on election nights. So we'll have that discussion at the end, but please let's not forget that. That's important. So why don't we give the floor to Ian for 45 minutes, and we'll come back and have a little bit of discussion with the board. So Brian, you are the master of ceremonies.
Sure. So Ian, I can do it any way here. I have the PDF that you had sent and I can go through it, or if it might be easier if you wanted to take control and then drive the bus.
Well, thank you. I assume you can hear me okay.
Yep, right ahead.
And what I'd love to do is ask you in a couple of minutes to perhaps share it with David Tebenkin if he's here, or David has seen. David, are you driving the boat?
I think David Tebenkin is, yes.
Oh, there he is. So if you can share, if that's okay with you, Brian, in a couple of minutes. So just by way of introduction, Chair Jurius and members of the board, we're pleased to be back with you for the discussion of 10 Converse Place. Because the three members of the board at any rate have not seen this project officially before, we thought we would ask the architects David Tebenkin and David Hassine to take you through a presentation that we had done for the select board some months ago. The benefit of this particular presentation is that it reviews a history of the project with the planning board. So we hope that would help. My name is Ian Gillespie, and I'm joined this evening by my partners and colleagues, Jan Steenbrugge and Paul Sutley. This presentation does not include references to the many meetings we also had with the board's peer reviewer, Dennis Carlone. Dennis was kind enough to say to this board in its previous incarnation that this was the best design he had seen in doing more than 50 of these peer reviews over the course of the years. Dennis, of course, also had a significant hand in helping the town in the planning that led up to the Central Business District rezoning. This project design is directly linked to what the planning board presented to that town meeting and to the will of the town as expressed in that vote. The rezoning was approved by 92% of the 2015 town meeting after 13 years of study. If members of this current board disagree with the conclusions of that town meeting, we would ask them to revisit the institutional memory of that meeting in the video from WinCam. I've had the good fortune of watching it all too many times. We have 2 or 3 alternative paths for this project. After the presentation by David and David, we would welcome a robust discussion with the board about which alternative direction we should take. And with that, let me turn it over to David Hussein.
Thank you, Ian. And David, if you could pull up the presentation. First of all, I would like to say that it's a pleasure to be back with you tonight and to introduce myself to the 2 new board members that are here with us tonight. Congratulations on becoming members of the board. And I look forward to meeting Cheryl at some point in the future. And presumably she'll have the benefit of seeing this as a recording. So as Ian mentioned, I'm going to quickly take you through the select board presentation we made about a year ago. I do want you to know that I had an opportunity to watch the discussion that this group had recently about this project. So I am aware of some of the questions that you have that I will try and address as I go through the presentation tonight. So first slide, please. These first few slides are going to look familiar to you, I believe. So first of all, I'm just going to reiterate the Cbt zoning goals just so that we are all on the same page. That the goal here is to build new multifamily residences in the CBD, to provide 15% affordable residential units, to create new retail space that reinforces the existing street character of the town of Winchester, allow up to a 3.0 FAR while balancing building volume and open space, creating meaningful publicly accessible open space. And yes, all the spaces that we have shown are publicly accessible open spaces, and meet the objectives of the CBD design guidelines, elements of form, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So at our first planning board meeting back in January of 2020, we did a rather long presentation of the site history, site observations, and a zoning outline. But tonight I will just share a few slides from that presentation. One which is an aerial photograph from 1946, showing the buildings that occupied the site at that time, including the laundry building, which remains in place, as well as a number of other structures and parking areas that filled that whole area of the site. Next slide, please. Today, this is what that site aerial would look like as an abstraction. The laundry building remains reclad, sitting on that site. There were a number of questions about the various property lines and so forth that were indicated on a previous presentation. And the lines that you see right there are the property line. There are a number of setback areas from the watershed that overlap the property lines in a couple of areas. And I should just note that that those areas cannot be built on. They are counted towards the open space calculation of the property, and all the things that we're going to show you do not cross that line conceptually. So this is, you were looking at these in a plan form at your earlier meeting, but this is an axonometric illustration of what a zoning FAR of 3 might look like on the site in 4, 5, and 6 stories. All 3 of these masses are approximately the same square footage, and the variance is really the building height. So as you can see, moving from left to right, what changes is the resultant open space from 11% to 30% to 50%. And so in the scheme on the right, which shows a 6-story building, we are able to achieve a 50% open space, resultant open space on the site. It's probably also worth noting that while these are very abstract massing diagrams, that the building on the left does not lend itself to housing. Housing dimensions are typically around 60 to 70 feet across in order to create a sort of a traditional double-loaded corridor situation. The building on the left is more akin to an office floor plate. What we learned at that board meeting, number one, was that we should explore the 50% open space option. So at the second planning board meeting, about a month later, we presented 3 design concepts for a 6-story scheme. And this is something that you also reviewed recently at your planning meeting, called the urban edge, the soft edge, and the figural edge. The urban edge was a response to the facade of the fire station, a more formal green space that extended to the water. The soft edge was a building that held Mount Vernon Street, but then slowly and gradually shifted towards the pond, creating a kind of an arc of green space along the waterfront, sort of an attenuated pedestrian path. And then finally a figural edge, which filled more of the site up on Mount Vernon Street, the more urban portion of the site, allowing the opportunity to create a figural public space on the waterfront. And the 3 images that you see below are illustrations of that idea. Again, all 3 of these open spaces would be publicly accessible spaces built and maintained by the developer. But the board, I think, gave us fairly clear direction at that meeting that they were interested in exploring the figural edge scheme. At the third planning board meeting, a month after that, we showed development of the preferred 6-story scheme. And I want to emphasize that even at this point, this wasn't intended to be a final design. This was an illustration of a design. We know that we will be spending quite a bit of time working with you on the details of the architecture, but we wanted to show you what this 6-story scheme might look like. So in the next slide, you see a plan that shows, looking down on the site, the figural green space at the waterfront, which David is indicating right now, a pedestrian path that went all the way around the site, and a series of volumes that set back. So the sort of jagged lines that you see across the top were the expression of an articulated roof line. This is a view of the ground floor plan of that scheme that we showed. At this point, what this ground floor accommodates is a number of things. One is a ramp to underground parking, a 2-way ramp to underground parking off of Converse Place. This is important because this is getting the parking below grade is a pretty significant aspect of the project, a big expense. It's adjacent to a waterway. We have to basically build a bathtub on the site in order to accommodate this. We feel fortunate that the configuration of Converse Place allows us to create access for the parking that minimally disrupts the character of the surrounding facades, because it's really a building with 4 facades. We're showing retail along Mount Vernon Street. At this point, we were showing a restaurant with a restaurant terrace on the corner of Mount Vernon and the pedestrian walkway, residential amenities, and then a residential lobby at the waterside with an entrance at the on Converse Place, and an entrance and drop off on Converse Place. Next slide, please. So this was you'll see these same views over and over again. This was a view looking down Mount Vernon towards Town Hall, showing the expression of a 4-story brick volume along Mount Vernon with a setback, and then 2 stories of a different material, different roof line, setback from the street for the total of 6 stories, but clearly trying to create a 4-story expression that worked in harmony with the other buildings on Mount Vernon. Next slide, please. And then as you're coming into town from the other side, Town Hall's on the left, the idea that the 4-story volume stepped up to a 5-story brick volume as it turned the corner with a single mansard-style roof line along the top of the building with a series of terraces and green spaces carved into the building. This is a view from the bridge, looking down, looking across the pond towards Town Hall and the library and such. This is showing the expression of the lobby entrance at that intersection at Converse Place and the waterfront. And I noted that one of you had mentioned, I think it was I Ching, had mentioned that it would be helpful to see this in the context of some of the other development that might be built along where the white building is, where and some of those other buildings. And I think that in one presentation we had that, but we don't have that tonight. But we could absolutely do that in the future if that was something that you wanted to see. Next slide, please. The reaction to that was that it was needed refinement on the 6-story scheme, but that there was also a desire to revisit the 5-story scheme and understand what the compromise might be for the public open space at the waterfront if we dropped a floor. And so we came back to you in April with a side-by-side version of these 2 schemes. So I'll show that to you now. First, these are some conceptual landscape plans by our landscape architect, Copley Wolf. On the left-hand side, you see the 6-story scheme with an oval, a pretty generous oval green space at the waterfront, the pedestrian paths that we talked about, hugging the edge of the pond, and the idea of significantly upgrading and reconstructing Converse Place with brick and granite and really making that a, we call it a Woonerf in Dutch terminology, but a pedestrianized street that would have traffic calming and would be a very welcoming way for people to walk through and around the site. On the right-hand side, you see the 5-story scheme. So the 5-story scheme involves taking more of the ground plane, a little bit more of the territory. It shrinks the public space, but we try to hold on to this concept of the figural space down at the waterfront by sort of narrowing the oval, engaging it with the building, and still holding on to those other elements that we thought were positive, like the Woonerf and the pedestrian walkway around the building and so forth. So this was really an attempt to sort of create a compromise between the 6-story and the 5-story situation. So this was showing the modified 6-story. So we had the four-story brick volume again on Mount Vernon. We raised the brick up on the sides to make a less sort of blunt expression of the upper stories relative to the lower stories, and reduced the complexity up there by creating what we called 4 lanterns marching along the waterfront. Again, this was not intended to be the final architectural expression, but the concept of sort of 4 pavilions down the street there, creating a syncopated and rhythmic roofline in town. And then this contrasts with the next slide, which shows you the 5-story version, which again, obviously drops a story, allows us to express the 4 stories of the brick on all sides of the building and create a setback to a different material and a different roof line on the upper floors. Now you'll see that in the next few slides as well. So this is looking at the 6-story version from across Town Hall. Again, those lanterns kind of marching around the edge of the building. The fact that the building is quite a bit shorter, so you can see past it towards the white space, which is a view of the bridge and so forth. And our initial attempts to sort of break down the scale with a series of ups and downs and volumes and so forth. This is the 5-story version, which obviously comes down in height, but extends deeper into the site. Again, we've tried to simplify the brick expression, very sort of traditional cornice, base, and so forth across around the side of the building, and a setback, slate or metal roof line with a series of sort of discrete dormers and pavilions as they march around the site. The scale of this, for example, is very typical of some streets in the Back Bay, Marlborough Street. This is the scale of Marlborough Street. And then a view looking at the project from the bridge. This is the 6-story version, where the building is pushed back from the edge of the waterfront, creating a lot of visual space between it and the view of Town Hall. At this point, we've expressed 5 stories of brick and then a roof line. Here is the 5-story version, which extends a little bit deeper, still has a very generous green space, more of an undulating brick facade, and some articulation at the front door to sort of mark that front door and create a celebrated facade around the pond, like so many of the other beautiful buildings that face the pond. So I think that the direction that we got at that meeting was, as I recall, was to really let's work on refinements to the 5-story scheme. That this seemed to have promise as a good compromise. So we came to you in May of 2020 with a refined version of this 5-story scheme. And this is the moment when I want to reflect on the CBD guidelines to create functionally diverse and animated downtown development, to strengthen the public ways and the open space system, to provide new structures that are compatible with Winchester's historic architecture and sense of place. This is very important to us and to me personally. To create new buildings and additions that are timeless, subtle, and elegant structures that will always feel comfortable and inviting to the general public. And finally, at a more detailed level, to work at properly scaled windows, masonry articulation, setbacks, animated silhouettes, and the use of materials that are warm. I should say that the development of the architecture that we're about to show you in this, which we showed the board before, was really at a higher level than we would normally show at a conceptual design level, but we wanted to begin to illustrate the kinds of things that we cared about and that we would plan on working with you on in more detail as we moved forward. So here is the revised ground floor plan of the 5-story scheme, showing the oval at the water, the walkway that moves around the oval. The oval, again, is a public open space, a little sort of park, if you will, adjacent to a residential lobby and amenities. A retail restaurant space that wrapped the corner from Mount Vernon around the pond. We also, as you can see here, introduced some softer forms on the water side of the building from the earlier scheme. I noted a number of you mentioned at the last meeting that we don't want a box, and we agree, we don't want a box. And so this was a place where we started to introduce some curving brick forms that really invited the public around, so that the landscape side of the building that faces the mill pond had a softer profile, and the more architectural, harder edge was sort of embedded into the town. You can also, of course, see the ramp and service and so forth at Converse Place. This is Copley Wolf's elaboration of that scheme with their notes about all the wonderful details of places to sit, shade trees, benches, new lighting, steps down to the water, etc. I know that in one of the comments that was made here was a question about whether we should have less retail and more residential entrances around the ground floor of the building. And that was something we were prepared to explore, but we stopped at this point, which we'll come back to in a moment. Next slide. So this is the last thing that we showed the board, which was a 4-story architectural expression along Mount Vernon Street with a significantly set back mansard style copper roof line that incorporated dormers and chimney-like elements that were again intended to recall 19th century rhythms of townhouse and lower scale architecture, as well as a special element on the other corner, which we'll show you in a moment, right there. So this is coming into town, looking at that soft corner as the brick and the retail wraps around and towards a facade, residential facade going down the street, again with this mansard style roof. There were some questions as to whether the brick chimney elements were a little too prominent. That was something that we were absolutely willing to take a look at and explore in later iterations, but of course we didn't get there. So this is that view of the building from this vantage point. Next slide, please. This is the view of the building. No one really ever looks at buildings like this because you always see them as an ensemble. But this is a view of the building itself, showing the radiused corner, the potential for restaurant retail, and extending the retail character of Mount Vernon Street along the edge with 3 stories of residences up above. I think it's worth noting that the 5th story, and this is true of many of our projects all around the region, by setting this 5th story back, it really disappears. And the expression is more almost of a copper cornice than of a full 5th floor. This is looking back across from the mill pond at the entrance to the building and the curved facade of the oval, which I know my clients are nervous about. It's an expensive feature. As it curves and wraps around, you have to get all special bricks. It's a whole kind of production to do curved brick facades, but we think that this could be a beautiful element as it turns the corner. And then breaking down that Converse Place facade into a series of stepped facades. So it really almost looks more like a residential townhouse street. Next slide. And then this is looking, where you're right in the mill pond at this point, but this is looking back at the building, showing that soft curve of red brick as it embraces the oval at the waterfront, and then the setback copper roof line as it wraps around the building. And the trees and so forth that we're showing are accurate. This is a view down the Woonerf, what that might look and feel like. It's got a nice scale, and as you can see, we're thinking about obviously extending the character of the brick sidewalks and lanterns and so forth of Winchester, but also introducing brick and granite and traffic calming elements in the street down Converse Place as with a destination of the water. This would probably be a way a lot of people would walk to the water and to the oval. Kind of creates a new street in town. And lastly, I believe this is the view of the building, very much inspired by the scale and character of 19th century and early 20th century town buildings. I travel all over Massachusetts, from Pittsfield and all of the towns across Massachusetts, always making note of the scale of the small bank buildings and residential buildings and so forth in the town. And that's what very much inspired this architectural expression. You can see the oval, the public space oval, the sort of generous space between the building and the waterfront. And then even though there's a tree in the way, the sort of framed view of Town Hall in the distance, magnificent building that it is. And oh yes, and thank you, David, for circling the also the view of the Richardsonian turret at the end of Converse Place. We see all of these elements in dialogue with one another. And I guess this is the last slide, which is the view of the open space. You know, I don't know that would be just end up being a big great piece of grass. I think that the idea would be benches and seating and so forth, but you know, that would be something we would develop with you in meetings ahead. A spectacular vista on the town. So I tried to answer some of your questions as I went through the presentation, but obviously we're here for any additional questions and feedback.
David, thank you very much. Every time I see this, I just, for the members of the board, you have to know it's a joy to work with David and his team. Mr. Chairman, we've spent, as you can see, close to $1 million to bring the permitting of this project to this status. And we need to know if this project is going to work for the board with some additional tweaks or not. It is, we know, a rather stark question, but it needs to be asked. And let me ask Jan, did you have any comments at this point? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Thank you for having us. We're excited to get this project started again, but as Ian said, we really need firm guidance. We cannot lose another year in planning. It's just not possible. Also, I would like to, I don't know, in advance apologize that we might go about this slightly different than we went about Main Street, where we really try to get as much unanimity, everybody to agree on the board. Unanimity, that's the word. I'm sorry, it's late. But in this case, I mean, the rules have changed. That's by the state. That's not by us. We only need 3 votes, so we are trying to, on a relatively fast way, try to find out, can we get 3 votes, yes or no? And if not, we need to move on. Just the sheer economics of it, we can't just keep going back and forth for another year. That said, I think we have a great project. I was very impressed with the planning board in your last hearing. So I'm actually very hopeful we can come to a wonderful project here. But let's get this done. So I think it's in everybody's best interest to get this done.
And
last thing we want is to keep the current building and just put a block on the street, you know.
And I guess I just wanted to follow up by saying that, like, I think that we, David and I, very much understand that with your blessing to move forward, that we're at the beginning of a process, not at the end of a process, and that there's a lot of work yet to do as we get into the design of the architecture in more detail. But you know, as Jan said, and as I think the presentation illustrated, we have really tried to follow your lead. I personally feel like we're in a good spot that could be massaged in really positive ways. But of course, at this point, we're here to hear from all of you. So thank you.
Okay, so that concludes your presentation, I take it?
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you.
Okay, so what I would like to suggest is that, let's see, what time it is? It is, we have if we stick to our existing schedule, we have 19 minutes to discuss this. So what I would like to do is I would like to give the board members 2 minutes apiece to make a statement or ask questions of the proponents here of this project. And because tonight is really packed, and I appreciate you're looking for some direction tonight. Hopefully we can get something moving, but we have really tight schedule. So why don't we start with who's first on my window? I Ching, are you willing to start? So I have a clock here, and I'm going to be fairly strict about time. So please go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation. I really appreciate the imagery and the explanation of how the process that you guys have gone through. I understand it has been a lot. And from what I understand of the PUD and the process, I'm really hopeful for this project. I think that you guys have done a fantastic job of following some of the guidelines that have been presented to you. I'm especially impressed with the 6-story to the 5-story transformation. I think that transformation where the 50% went to, I can't remember, 30, 40% green space, it didn't feel like there was a real sense of loss of the green space, and it was still well considered with the figure, and all the facades around it were really well considered. I think that the really strong city edge at Mount Vernon is the right place to be, whereas the softer edge or along the water feels right. I'm concerned a little bit about the public versus the facing just the activity between the privatized lobby spaces and the residential amenities to the public open space. Okay, got it. And then the Vernoff, that space, I like that it's going to become a new streetscape, but however, it's very, very prominently back of house, with the garage and stuff. So if that could become a more, more comfortable space to walk and to sort of stroll and not be so, back of the restaurant and smelling, the garbage, that kind of stuff, that would be great. But I'm concerned about the units themselves. I think that we really need affordable housing in our town, and with with the widening of the footprint, and I wonder about the quality of the spaces inside. I know you said 50 to 60 feet as a double corridor as an optimal space, but now it's becoming wider. So are the interiors of the units going to be? Oh, got it. Going to be a little bit lacking. And I'm concerned about that. And I'm also concerned about the cost of each of these units. So if there is fewer parking spaces, that would be wonderful. I think that would be, we don't have enough units like this that are for people who choose not to have cars or who cannot because of disability or because of old age. These kinds of housing things, I think that also without parking, it would keep the unit costs down, and that would be very optimal. So I'm very optimistic about this project. So thank you very much.
Great, and I thank you for being pretty good on your time. I'm writing down questions, which I'll gather, and then we can direct it to these people, to the proponents at the end. Next on my screen is Sally. So please.
Thank you, Diab, and welcome to the 10 Converse Place team. I am very grateful for your interest in investing in our town. And I think that it is entirely possible to develop this site in a way that meets the strategic goals of our town, which I think you're all very familiar with, and complements the look and feel of our community. To me, going to 5 stories is a really big building on this site. And I am extremely grateful that you've taken it from 6 to 5. I think that the massing of the brick being 4 stories with 1 story of slate or copper at the top is contributing to its sense of massiveness, and that having a distinct articulation between the 2nd and the 3rd floor and the 3rd and the 4th and the 4th and the 5th will allow it not to feel quite so much like, I don't know, a New Bedford mill building. It's just these sheer walls are very looming. And I don't want to think of Mount Vernon Street as a city edge. It's a town edge. And so stepping back in that way will help with that very much. So there is a 25-foot buffer zone, and using that psychologically as part of your open space, even though you can't count that in your own calculations of open space, means that the people will really, really appreciate everything. The residents of our town will appreciate everything that you do to clean up the waterfront and make it a public-private space. And then we would, of course, continue to be grateful for the fact that there's private money involved in maintaining that space. I do feel very strongly that the restaurant should not be on the northeast corner of the building facing Mount Vernon Street. That's the coldest, windiest, shadowiest spot. And it's not the vision of enlivening the Mill Pond waterfront that I am getting from a lot of people that I talk to, that of course there needs to be a restaurant on the water, and there's outdoor seating, and there's benches, and there's lanterns, and there's umbrellas. It's not tucked against the bridge and Mount Vernon Street. It's on that fabulous curve. And I know you've got some gym located at that spot right now. And I just don't think that putting a gym on the first floor of this building is going to do the most benefit for the future of this downtown. I just...
Sally, if I could interrupt, you're at 3 minutes, so.
Yeah, I also want to say I'm grateful that you took the firewall chimneys off the top floor. And I want to say also that there are, in my view, a number of the recommendations of our town center design guidelines that in fact haven't been addressed. And that what I would very much favor is an opportunity to sit down with you and do a line-by-line review of every one of those requirements, so that I understand how you think that what you've proposed does meet that objective, and maybe we can find a meeting ground, because right now I just don't think the building looks as good as it should.
Okay, thank you, Sally. Next, I guess, Heather, I know you're here somewhere, but you're not on my screen. Heather Hannon, if you could please, are you there, Heather? Is Heather's mic off?
Her mic is on, but it looks like it's not working because, yeah, she's unmuted, but we're not hearing her, unfortunately.
Okay, that's no good. So Brian, if you could put up Cheryl's email, and if you could, you can go ahead and read it, and I'll try to contact Heather and let her know that her voice is not working.
Well, if she can probably hear us, and I would say to log out and log it again, and then connect audio through there. In the meantime, I'm going to bring up the questions that Cheryl had sent.
Right. So this is, I just want to say Cheryl Wolf is our newest board member. And while she wasn't able to be here this evening, she did send us some comments. So if you want to go ahead, Brian.
Sure. So it's really more of direct questions to the team. So the fire station entrance on Mount Vernon Street will impact both commercial and residential use. How is the building program and design addressing the nature of this adjacency?
Oh, we can, if there, are there any comments that we can pull out of here? Because I want to keep all the questions.
So no, sorry, there are no comments here, Dia. These are all questions. These are all questions from Cheryl, so maybe these should be put to the end.
Okay, and do we have any word from Heather?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Heather.
Yes, go right ahead.
Go right ahead.
Okay. I'm back. Okay, so I don't have that much to say, and I can make up for Sally's overage, maybe. I think my comments are similar to the last time we met, that my concerns had been about activation along the edge, like the number of doorways, basically, because the perimeter is very long, and I don't see that there's a lot more doors activating the edges. And then I think the top level is still looking a little bit funny, like very heavy on top of the building, like really bulky and kind of weighing it down. But otherwise, I think generally the urban design is still in the right direction. I think it'll be important for the public open space to be really great so that people feel like they got something when they traded, for all the people who don't want to see massing that big on that site. I think if the park space is really great, that might make up for it for people.
And Heather, thank you. I just want, and just to clarify, the last time we met, we absolutely took note of your issue about activating the entrances, activating the base with more entrances. But we haven't gone back to the design yet to sort of incorporate those thoughts. But I didn't want you to think that we hadn't done that, because we just haven't done it yet. So
yeah. I just mean I still have the same sort of thoughts. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm wondering if, Brian, did you get my chat about the PUD? You're looking it up.
No, I have it here. I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
Okay, so as you probably, well, we've spoken about this a lot in the past. I believe that this site can take this density. I believe that the design, I like the design. I share I Ching's concern about the size of the units and how we can increase affordability. In particular, and I know this is a source of ambiguity and disagreement, that when you go for a FAR of 3 under the PUD, and Brian has put it up in the chat for us, because that's what we do these days. In order to get a 3.0, it clearly meets the goals and objectives of the CBD by offering more diverse housing opportunities. And that, I think, is the key question, is how, if we give you a 3.0, we expect something which is in excess, the way I read it, of what's presently required under the CBD zonings. Otherwise, why would you give you an extra FAR of 3.0 if the town isn't getting back something special? Because as you can acknowledge, a 3.0 is a very large increase over the by right and even the special permits. So when we're negotiating as to what the town gets in response to what you're getting in terms of the economic viability or your profit out of this extremely important site, what is the town getting in return in terms of that diversity of housing opportunities? And I recognize that this term is not well defined. And I believe that, I hope that if this project proceeds, we can come to an understanding. And I've asked the Housing Partnership Board to provide their idea of what a more diversity would mean, because they certainly are, we're looking at housing and they're obviously a key part of that. So I think those are my statements, and hopefully I came in under 2 minutes. So what I'd like to do is to, I believe I Ching had a question, but I'm afraid I wrote down, what was your question, I Ching? I'm sorry.
Oh, I don't really remember, but maybe it was the quality of the units now that the footprint has increased in size, because they will be deeper, and so there will be less sunlight and natural light because of the 6 to 5 floor change.
Right.
Oh, and
and
it's
you
a-
had,
yeah. I was just going to say it's a good comment. I think that we had started to study that, and we felt fairly confident that we could make that work, but because of just the nature of the units, we wouldn't want to go deeper, but we felt fairly confident that we could make that work. One of the things also about the width of the building was something I wanted to respond to Cheryl's questions, which are that we are, and this is important for Sally as well in terms of the apparent height of the building, is we are trying to locate the mechanicals in the 5th story roof line, largely concealed, which is made possible in part by the dimension of the building.
Okay, I guess one of the, if I could follow on each things, and that is that if we do increase the number of units, if the number of units were increased to perhaps make them more affordable, no, I'm sorry, I'm trying to reconstruct I Ching's question, and I apologize.
Well, I think I conflated
worried about
the idea of parking, but
Yeah.
also kind of advocating maybe to the board to recommend for fewer spots per unit, because we do lack housing that gives people the opportunity to not have cars or not have to pay for cars. And I think uncoupling parking with units would bring the housing prices down and construction costs too. It just takes up less space. So I mean I would, it's maybe a question for the board, like could we reduce the parking requirements?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I might just add, I Ching, I'm not sure you're aware, our actual requirement here, and Brian can weigh in, is actually just 0.5 spaces per unit. So we're driven more by the element of market demand at this point than we are the actual size. Brian, that's right, isn't it? 0.5?
I believe it's 0.75.
I thought it was because
you
of
can get down
to the train.
So yeah, so that's something that you can apply for. But the base zoning here is 0.75 with the opportunity to get down to 0.5 or even 0 if the board wishes. But yeah.
Right. So we are driven more by the market demand than we are. The question of affordability keeps coming up. And shame on me for not having mentioned in the introduction that we do, of course, have the 15% affordable that the zoning requires. It's 10 of one, 5 of another, but it's essentially 15%. So the units in this building, with the cost of construction skyrocketing today, these units are going to cost to build somewhere around $1.2 million to $1.5 million. So the project with 15% affordable, currently it's designed as 46 units, which would imply 7 affordable. So those affordable, and I see John's on the phone with us. We've worked a great deal with John Subiera on a number of issues. Those are to be sold somewhere around $250,000. So we lose $1 million to $1.2 million on each affordable unit. So we are going into this at a cost of about $7 to $8 million for the affordable today. So just as a baseline, yes, we have it. It's at 15%, and those are the economics.
Okay. I wanted to go to Sally. I believe I don't want to summarize what you said. I want to ask if you have any questions you'd like to direct to them. Your mic is off, Sally.
Thank you. So the 46 units with 7 affordable, that's all happening inside your FAR of 3.0, which is 77,000 square feet. And my question to you, especially since we're trying to maximize the affordability of the entire complex, frankly, to make it possible for a more diverse community of people of all ages to live in Winchester, making the building to an FAR of 2.5, keeping it to a stepping up, sort of the wedding cake concept, although I don't like the reference, but as it says in the design guidelines, articulating each floor separately and bringing it down, or maybe the first 2 floors can be, whatever. But making smaller apartments that have less parking, that have therefore, the opportunity for you to have your number of units goals met in a smaller building would balance out the need for open space, the need for affordable housing, the need for profit, the need to preserve the beauty of this really pivotal site in town. So I'm advocating for a lower FAR and smaller apartments, not necessarily fewer. And I would be very happy to agree with I Ching on being flexible on parking requirements for this structure.
So can someone from the development team talk about the feasibility of moving to a smaller building with smaller units? I believe these are condominiums, so it would also, I don't know, Sally, if you intended to change from condominiums to rental, or were you just using?
I don't think it's certainly my place to advise the owners about how they would manage the development of this property in that regard. If you build a rental building, you're either committing to manage it or committing to find a rental management partner. It would certainly serve the interests of Winchester much better if this building were all rental, because of the way the laws are configured for affordable housing credits in this city, in the Commonwealth.
Well, I think that first off, we would actually have to meet a minimum, I believe, of 25% for those laws to actually come in, and these would be counted. So that may not be possible unless they're deciding to go to 25% affordable. But why don't we hear from the developer team whether a 2.5 FAR with smaller units is something they would consider? Or how would that change the project?
Yeah, I can take.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I can take that one. The amount of units is actually not as relevant as the square footage. We mainly count in square footage. You know, the cost to build per square foot and the cost and how much you can sell a square foot for. So smaller or bigger doesn't really change the dynamics much. On the contrary, if you have smaller units, normally they tend to be more expensive per square foot. So you're actually making your problem maybe worse. They tend to be more expensive per square foot than the larger units.
Right.
There is a very limited possibility to go down. The question was raised before, what is the town getting back? Well, we're getting rid of a very ugly building that is extremely expensive because it is fully leased up. It's a great cash flowing asset. There's nothing wrong with that building. It can stand there for another 100 years and be perfectly well. So that is, just to take that down is a huge loss. I mean, the building alone is valued, I think, at $5.5 or $6 million that we just completely get out of. Also, the wall nerve, the site work, all of that is extremely expensive. And as maybe some of you guys know, if you want to build an architecturally gorgeous building with brick and details and this and that, again, that's extremely expensive. So instead of an ugly building on the underused site, you're going to get a gorgeous building with beautiful landscaping, a wall nerve, and affordable housing, 15%. And the cost for the parking, honestly, the cost is either you go underground or you stay above. Once you go underground, if you have 10 spots or 20 or 40, it really doesn't change all that much. It's an automated system. The cost, you can save a lot of money and probably get more affordability if you put the parking above ground. But I think the last thing you want on a site like this, if you don't like a gym on the first floor, which I absolutely agree, it should not be there. And in later iterations, that has been removed. If you don't want a gym there, you sure as hell do not want parking garage on the first floor looking over the water, right? So it's absolutely, in my opinion, the town's best interest and in our best interest to put that parking underground. But that's, again, a huge cost. And the benefit for Winchester is that you don't have a stupid wall of cars looking over the water or even looking over the street. So the benefits in this particular, there's a trade-off. Either we can go affordable and we can go much cheaper architecture and put the parking above ground and you can get a lot more affordable units in there. or you want to go really high-end, gorgeous looking feel, underground parking, get rid of an ugly building, get rid of those ugly antennas. I mean, the antennas alone is $100,000 a year, you know? So, I mean, there's a lot of trade-offs here. And if you just solely focus on one, the affordability, I don't think this is the project to get a huge amount of affordable units there. That's not the kind of building the town would want on this prime location, you know? You don't want a vinyl clad square box, you know, with some balconies, with then 20% affordable. I don't think this is a site for it. But I mean, it's your town in the end, but
I just want to point out that we have accepted a proposal for the Waterfield lot, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, 60% affordable, which is definitely not vinyl clad siding. It's a gorgeous looking building. So it is possible. So I just want to say that affordable does not require it look hideous.
You said 16%?
60.
66%.
66%.
40 units out of 60 units
And
are
so
restricted.
So
Yeah, but
this
I have
is,
to say that project is getting a lot of pushback, and so.
well, but the point is that we reviewed, we had 5 proposals. All of them came in at significantly higher levels than 15% of affordability. And all of those proposals were really well put together. So all I'm doing is pushing it back against the notion that an affordable building has to look like a vinyl clad box, because we had 5 examples where it did not. But I want to continue on to our next member. Heather, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
No.
Okay. So unfortunately, I think we are going to have to end this segment. I hope that the development team has gotten some indication of where the board lies. I hope this gives you more clarification. I think that there are certainly some issues that we can discuss in terms of if the economics don't allow putting affordable units on this site, there are other ways that we can handle that in terms of payments to the Affordable Housing Trust, things like that, which we could consider. I think that I will not summarize what the board has said, because I'm not going to put words in their mouths, but I think you have an idea of how to proceed. I hope you do. And if
Mr. Chairman, forgive me, I have no idea how to proceed. Do you, Jan, have an idea?
No, actually, I don't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude. We have no idea.
Well,
more affordable than 15% on this site. We're already $7 million, $8 million for affordable. We lose how many million when we take the building down? 5 million when we take the building
At least.
Then we have a gorgeous building that, as David points out, is extraordinarily expensive. So you guys have to make some choices. We'll keep the existing. We'll go to a box. We'll do parking at grade, and we'll do what we can within a 2.5 FAR. Far more profitable, and we can get it done. So Jan, I mean, help me out.
But pardon me for interrupting, but you just heard 3 of the 4 present board members say that they are willing to continue looking at this design, and yet that doesn't give you any indication of how the board is moving?
No, I heard one member say she wanted the design to be lower. I hear one member saying that they want more affordable. No, we have no clarity. This has been going on so long. We can leave it at that. I don't mean to be argumentative, but after this presentation, you can see where we have been now for 1.5 years. And we come to a meeting and we still have nothing.
I would disagree with that, but obviously you're the person who's looking for more clarity. I don't know that you're going to get the board to say, yes, we agree with every part of this proposal at this stage. I don't know what we cannot say this is the proposal we will accept, because it's not officially before us, and that would be I don't think that's appropriate for this board to say that. I don't know what are the reassurances you require, given that we are talking about a proposal which is in a we're in a pre-application meeting. Right?
So can we file with what we have and work from there and refine what we have there? Which means we skate at the edges and we change some details here, a little bit of some doors here, stoops there. But the basic idea is a 3.0 FAR over 5 stories on the side.
You can certainly file it. Yeah, I mean, you could have filed this last year, except that you were uncertain about whether the board would approve it. As one of your team has pointed out, because it does have an affordable component, you no longer need a supermajority of the board. So your decision to file this permit is, yeah, you can go right ahead and do that.
Okay, that's good.
The point is, if you want further clarity from this board, I think you understand. I mean, I thought you got a fairly clear, and perhaps the other board members would like to jump in because I don't want to hog the time. If they think that there is, how they feel about how the level of clarification that's been given tonight.
I can jump in to say that I'm hearing loud and clear from our board that they favor affordable housing, they favor open space, and I'm not hearing a lot of emphasis on design. So I'm hearing myself being the sole voice saying, I would like very much for this building to, or not the sole voice, because Heather, you have had some excellent design recommendations, including the number of doors and the celebration of the Wohnurf. And I, again, reiterate the need to move the restaurant to the water. If you can work with the building look to make it look like it fits in this town more than it does. And there's a lot of really good language in our central business district design regulations that I offer again to sit down and go a line by line review through your design and say, from my perspective, as not a majority voice, obviously, I don't think this design does it. I'm not saying we can't build on this site. It's a fabulous site and it deserves a fabulous solution again. So let's keep working on it, but don't think that what you've got now is pretty close to done, because I don't feel that way. Maybe you don't need me to, but that's where we're at.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment?
I just want to comment that I don't know that their design has to get any farther before they decide to file. Like, we have seen a lot of iterations and a lot of different design, and we've given a lot of feedback. There's time after they submit for us to talk more about that and hear from the community. I don't want you, Sally, to be giving them the message that they can't submit this. I mean, we have seen it several times.
Right.
Right, but Heather, the issue is now it costs us several more $100,000 to take this to filing. Our last filing for 654 Main was 320 pages. We can do that, but that's a tremendous amount of money. If these are the headwinds that we're going to be facing, again, I defer to Jan, but if these are the headwinds, you guys have to understand, there's no way in the world we're going to do that. It just doesn't make sense. You're talking about
in the world that you would do what, Ian? I'm sorry.
That we would file this project with you as it is. You, Sally, you don't want it. Diab wants more affordable, which we can't afford. We don't know if we can afford the building we have. The Wohnurf and all these things that you talk about, again, what we're doing for the town. What we're doing for the town is proposing a 3.0 building under a PUD, which is exactly, precisely what this board presented to the town meeting in 2015, which was the justification for the CBD district and for this board, not the ZBA, to become the permit granting authority. this board is not doing the permit granting authority piece of its job. And I'm sorry to be, this is 2015. This is exactly what was presented.
I can understand your frustration, but again, you came into this asking for the maximum allowable under our zoning bylaws. And I'm really surprised that you didn't think there would be some pushback in terms of what extra you were providing the town. I understand that you have made a decision to go a very expensive route for a beautiful building. I don't dispute that. But I think that when you look at what you're getting, yes, the town is getting some very aesthetically pleasing things, but the town needs more than aesthetics. And so the question of what happens with affordability, as I mentioned, we can negotiate what that means. We can come to an understanding as to if you cannot do affordable units on site because they will cost you, some large fraction of 1.4 or 5 or 6 million, then we can certainly look at other options. There are certainly less expensive places in town to build affordable housing. So as I said before, I don't see these headwinds that you claim are existent. You've got at least 3 board members who are interested and willing to go forward. You have 1 board member who I think has some concerns about design and height, which are not out of the ordinary for people in this town. Where are these headwinds?
Also, can I just add to that, Diab, that there are some cost-saving opportunities in this project. I can think of 2 now, and I'm sure that you've tried to identify as many as you can, and you've got them on the table as options. One of them is that it is in the zoning bylaw that if there is off-site parking within a certain number of feet of the site, and I can't remember if I think it's 500 feet, that it is considered meeting a parking requirement. And I think that when I took my ruler to the sidewalk and the street distance to the land behind our public safety buildings, there is past studies that have looked at the feasibility of a parking garage on that location. In this scenario, if it truly is feasible, and I'm not certain that it is, this would be an opportunity for the town and you to do cost sharing on a project that would benefit the town in many, many ways, and would possibly cost you less than creating a waterproof bathtub in a flood zone for parking. So that's one. And the other one that everybody loves, this is the curved brick face, but it's possible to celebrate the pond, celebrate the open space, psychologically increase the open space, and take the money out of making a curved facade and put it into other forms of building articulation that are more consonant with the architectural precedents that surround this site. So there's 2 right there. And I'm not saying that they're a panacea, but I think this sweet spot between a super fancy building and some denigrated vision of what affordable housing should look like. There's a sweet spot. It's not either or. It's not I'm taking my marbles and leaving if you don't get me what I want. On either side, the town needs housing and the town needs this site to be beautiful. It needs it to add value to the town center. It needs to bring in vitality and people. And to I Ching's and Diab's point, it's to bring in all kinds of people, not just people who can buy $3 million condos. So I don't know, I'm rambling now, I'm sorry. I'm not opposed to this development. I want it to meet all these goals in a balanced way. I'm not at all opposed.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it at that, and I apologize, but we've gone 20 minutes over, and we're going to have to bump one of the things off of our agenda to complete this meeting on time tonight.
Mhm.
So I hope that we can, the funny thing is, Ian, is that I am really in favor of your proposal. So my pushback is because I don't understand your position. And I really would like us to come to an understanding which allows this project to move forward. And I don't know how much more clarity you're going to get out of this board. You've heard us all, and I don't know how we proceed. I think you should go ahead and file it personally. I understand there's a financial risk to you to do so, but I think that we have gone through what the pre-application meetings were designed to do. We have had very heated, but I think good discussions. And at this point, you're going to have to make that decision without, I think, any further input from the board, because I don't know how much more input we can give you.
Well, we'd like to file something. The point of pre-application is to reach a common ground so that by the time we apply, I think, Brian, that was the original discussion. And Diab, I can remember you at town meeting, if I'm not mistaken, were particularly pleased that the planning board would be the permit granting authority, because the CPA did not have that authority. And I think you spoke to that at town meeting in 2000.
I do recall doing so, yes.
Right. So we saw that, and I think you saw that then when you proposed it to the town, you saw it as something so that by the time we get to filing, a very expensive process, detailed, and ties up a whole bunch of time in the town, in the engineering department, everywhere else. By the time we get there, that we have a commonality of theme, that it's, if it's not 3.0, we have not been pushing 3.0. I would like to point out that as you saw through that review, it was the planning board and Dennis who said, yeah, this is a great project, just do this, this, and this. And so we kept doing that at huge cost. And we don't want to keep going through that. So I would ask you if we could come back, if we, I'm not sure what the redesign, Jan, what do you want to do here?
I would.
I think I'll listen to Diab. If he thinks we can file, we have input from everybody in the board now. We'll file and see what happens.
Okay.
Well,
very good. Diab, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I really
thank you very much for your time.
You can call me Diab. Nobody calls me Mr. Jurius. So thank you. I appreciate the candidness of everyone's opinions, and I hope I really do hope we see this being filed so that we can move forward. I think this is an enormously important step in revitalization of our downtown. And, this team has been, I think, a really great team to work with on the technical details so far as I'm concerned. That's my personal opinion. So, thank you all. And I think we're going to have to move on to the board's agenda.
Thank you all very much.
Have a wonderful evening.
We look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Bye. Okay, so we are now stuck at a point, folks, and I apologize for letting that go on longer, but I think it was important that we go through that. So we have two things left on our agenda. We have a master plan implementation committee discussion, and we have a discussion of how or if the board responds to the referendum to revisit, or what's the correct way to do this, to undo town meeting's approval of the land development agreement for the Waterfield lot. And both of those, I think, are extremely important. One of them, I think, is more timely than the other, in that the referendum actually will occur at the date of our next meeting. So if the board chooses to make to go one way or the other, I think we need to do that tonight. And then, unfortunately, we will have to reschedule the master plan implementation committee discussion. How does the board feel about this?
Sorry to interrupt, but we still have to do two petitions that are even more timely.
My God.
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but one's a revisit petition.
Okay.
I thought you were just going to hand it right over to me, and I was going to go right into 19 Wenchmere.
I
But
apologize, but
yeah.
why don't we, well, can we just ask the board if they want to postpone or reschedule our 9:45 master plan implementation committee discussion? Just chime right in, folks.
Yes. Heather,
I'm sorry,
Yes.
okay, I think Heather said yes.
yes, but I could also do it really quickly too.
Okay, and Sally, I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
I'm happy to postpone the master plan implementation committee discussion, and I do believe that as far as the comments that I have prepared for the two petitions, I can be brief.
Okay, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do the ZBA petitions? We will do Article 6, referendum discussion, and if a miracle happens and we can get to master plan, then we can hear I Ching's comments. I'm not, okay, Brian, it's all yours.
Sure. So petition 3940, this is 19 Wedgemere. This was before the board previously at our last meeting. We voted unfavorable action based upon the out of scale elements of the garage, as well as a negative effect on a historic resource, the historic resource being the house itself, as well as the streetscape. So the height of the garage was previously proposed at 27.7. The current proposed height is now 16.2, which is more of a typically sized garage if it's going to be so close to the property line. I recommended favorable action with regards to this petition based upon the new design, with the condition that the Winchester tree warden, that being the DPW director, be consulted, which I believe he already has been, to determine the mitigating conditions for the unauthorized removal of the town tree. So I just kind of leave that up to the DPW director, and that's all I had. So back to you, DM.
This 19
Okay, why don't we go through does anyone on the board want to vote against this? I'm sorry, I have to change my view. I only see I Ching at the moment. So let me see if I can.
I would vote for favorable action.
Okay, and then Sally?
I would vote for favorable, and I have questions that I feel strongly need to be answered.
Okay, and Heather?
I think that it's better the way that it is, but I do want us to keep following up on what the consequences for cutting down a tree.
Okay, so there is a backstory on the tree cutting, which was not available to us last time. So Brian, do you want to quickly fill us in on that backstory?
Well, it's just basically, it's a little bit unclear in terms of it. The applicant was not the person who took those trees down, didn't pay didn't pay for those trees to be removed. It was a neighbor, so it's a little sensitive. So the idea is the tree warden is going to handle this situation, but it does not appear that the current applicant was really involved in the cutting down of those trees at the moment. More to come.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Heather?
Kind of.
Okay. Well, why don't we quickly, so Sally, you had some concerns you wanted to talk about. So very quickly, please.
So quickly, my first concern is about setbacks. So we have a 15-foot setback side and rear in RDB 10, and they're proposing an outdoor kitchen and an outdoor wood burning fireplace built right up to the property line. And those are structures in our definitions of our zoning code describe what those things are. And I don't understand what is the point of a 15-foot setback if you can put a kitchen right on your property line. So that's my first concern is, do these structures not comply with setback requirements? My second question, again, goes to the tree, and we just discussed it, but I want to say, but I do not want this act to be met with impunity. It is wrong to destroy a healthy, mature town shade tree, and there has to be consequences. If I'm hearing correctly, it wasn't the applicant who took the tree down. So now we have a little Poirot to do to figure out who took it down and find out who's responsible for defacing that particular portion of our public realm.
So I think that this is now, I mean, the tree warden is, I believe, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, the appropriate town entity to pursue that is certainly the tree warden's jurisdiction. So I don't know that, I completely agree with your statement, Sally. I don't know whether the.
It is not zoning. In short, it is not zoning. It is not in the zoning bylaw. It's in the general bylaw.
That's right.
Yeah.
I
So,
understand that we're stepping out of our trail or our track or whatever they call it, but I cannot, as a citizen, sit here and think that people who cut down a mature shade tree on town property should be met with impunity. That's just,
well, I agree. But that is,
it's outside of our purview. So
yeah, unfortunately.
answer the setback question for me, and then I can vote yes.
Yeah. So Brian, can you provide more info on structures and setbacks, whether or not a kitchen or something would meet that requirement?
So I think it's unclear. I do not think that what they have on the site plan within the setback in terms of a wood burning fireplace with a cooking element, whether that actually is considered a structure, that is something for the ZEO to determine. I do not believe that these are called out specifically in the zoning bylaw. So I think maybe there's a potential gray area, but at the moment, I do not see an issue with these items in the setback because it's not called out, but I'm not the authority here.
Okay.
The definition is something that is erected and fixed to the ground in a fixed location. I don't perceive this outdoor kitchen and this, also there's no specification about how high they will be. And I have to say, just from a sheer out of the box reaction, if I had a neighbor who put up a 6 or 7 story chimney right on my lot line, or 2 chimneys right on my lot line, that would feel wrong. Sorry,
Okay.
Jane.
Can I remind everyone that we were trying to move through these things quickly? So can I make a motion to for a favorable action with I don't know the language, but to talk about this setback of this structure for the cooking element.
Okay, so I think the language we want is to
It would be something like recommend favorable action with further clarification on structures in the setback.
okay.
So I don't want to make this drag on, but I've been to a lot of people's houses where they have like a pizza oven chimney thing right on the edge of their property. That's like
So
where
that's
people put
not
them.
for us to decide, right? I mean,
Right. I'm just saying.
CBA, check it out. We're moving on.
Maybe we should move after I get off the car.
Okay, so let's get this down correctly. So the motion is to recommend favorable action on petition 394019 Wedgemere, with a comment that the planning board is
Concerned about structures in the setback.
was concerned about structures within the setback.
So moved.
Well,
Okay.
and I would
And that was moved by I Ching
Yes.
and seconded by Heather Hannon. And Sally, really quickly.
I just want the language of the motion to say, dependent upon confirmation that such structures are permitted in the setback.
If it's a structure and it's, I think the
If it's
question is
considered a
whether,
structure, yeah,
if
it's
it's
whether it's
considered a
considered a
structure.
structure or not. Yeah, correct.
that's all. The only
Because-
question is it a construction or not? If it's a structure, then it's not permitted. If it is a structure, whatever.
Right.
Okay,
got that.
roll call vote, please. Sally Dale, please.
Aye.
I Ching Scott, please.
I
Heather Hannon, please.
I
Jarius, I 4-0 in favor with the one comment. Now let's move on to the next one, please, Brian.
I will go really quick. I just want to make a quick note that someone does have their hand up. I'm not sure what that's related to, if it's related to this petition, but.
We unfortunately have made a vote and we don't have time, so.
Oh, I just wanted, this is Caroline Sack speaking. I just,
Yeah,
there was
I'm sorry, Ms. Sachs. I really, we have zero time for this. I'm sorry, we voted and.
it's not regarding the vote. It was just a clarification regarding the tree, which is that as the adjacent property, we had nothing to do with the tree removal and have confirmed that with the owner. So I just wanted to make that clear as there are several neighbors on this call.
Okay, well, that's fine. That's again, as Sally Dale said, we're doing some Poirot-ing then, I guess. So I appreciate that. So let's, we need to move on to 3942 96 Cambridge, please, Brian.
Sure, yeah. So petitioner seeking an appeal under from the Winchester zoning bylaw from a permit that the building commissioner / zoning enforcement officer that they denied a building permit to install a wider garage door at this location at 96 Cambridge Street. So they're appealing that decision by the zoning enforcement officer. In addition to that, the petitioner is also seeking a variance in order to perform that, meaning to be permitted to widen the existing garage from 12 feet to 18 feet to allow for the storage of major recreational equipment. So my opinion is that ZEO did act appropriately in denying this building permit. The bylaw contemplates a maximum of 3 automobiles allowed in a garage and also requires recreational equipment to be stored in a building or in the rear yard. I understand that placing the vehicles, I understand that placing the vehicles in the rear yard is certainly difficult, and the variance application talks about this, about the shape and topography of the lot. But the issue here has less to do with the lot and more to do with the fact that there's already space for three vehicles. Whether or not 3 vehicles are stored in there, it doesn't really matter. It's that this would make the space for a 4th vehicle. So it's a little unique about this lot when compared to all the other lots in the zone that would necessitate space for a 4th vehicle, or in this particular case, 2 recreational vehicles and trailers. But no matter what's stored in these area, what is proposed is a garage for more than 3 automobiles. So which is why this was denied in the first place. So because of that, I recommended unfavorable action with regards to this variance application and make no comment about the appeal.
Okay. I am having unstable internet, but I caught most of what you said, Brian, and I read your planner's notes. So, is there someone who has a different opinion with that analysis, or is everyone?
I have a clarifying question, Brian. What is the chapter and section of the zoning bylaw that they are needing to have an exception to? Is it in the, like, I'm looking at 518, parking of larger motor vehicles?
No, it's in here. It's section 3, group 6, in the uses, and it says it's for personal vehicles, no more than 3 personal vehicles, with a maximum of 1 being commercial. So it actually doesn't matter what you put in there. It's making a garage that would be suitable for that many vehicles, meaning you can't have a garage for 4 vehicles if all you're, even if you're putting in, it doesn't matter what you're putting in there, is my point. Meaning, so yeah. They're saying that they should be able to put it in there because it's actually not a car that they're putting in there. It's a recreational vehicle, and there's still only 3 vehicles in there. But the idea is that the space should be allotted for at most 3 vehicles. So, yes, Yi-Ching.
I would say I would recommend unfavorable action, but mostly because it's a reading of, and the space has already been made. They're not adding additional space, they're just adding a door, so that the facade reads as right now as 3 garage spaces, but they're changing it to read as if there are 4 garage spaces. And it's unfortunate that these 4 spaces are at 2 different spots. And so it's it's just a confusing facade, and it's, you know, but it's on a street that very few people are going to be walking by and looking at. I guess I get it's a thing of convenience for them, but I know, I feel like the spirit of the law was to just say it should look like 3, and now it's like 4.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Exactly.
Heather, did you, or Sally, did you express an opinion which way you're going to vote?
Well, I understand I Ching's comment that she's right, because the house has 2 garage entrances.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Excuse me. I just want to find out if someone is going to vote opposite from Brian's recommendation, and then if no one is, then we can move directly to a motion. Okay, everyone is frozen on my screen. Sally, I can't. Oh, you are.
no, I wasn't moving because I was thinking.
Oh, okay.
I
Well,
was
while you're
originally thinking I would be in favor of this change because I didn't realize because I couldn't find it in our code about the prohibition of not having 4 garage spaces. And so to I Ching's point, Cambridge Street is a busy road. You know, I don't know, it's not written in the code that depending on, you know, what kind of a road you live on, you can have more garage spaces or less. So sticking to the code, it's a no, they can't do it.
Okay, so Heather, did we lose Heather?
You want to just look over here and see what they're talking about? You change making it look like there's just.
Well, it looks like someone doesn't have their mute on.
Right, but did we lose
Yeah,
Heather?
no, Heather is here. But again, maybe that has frozen.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Oh, yeah, I don't think they can have 4 garage doors, especially facing the street.
Okay, so I think that by adding the extra door, they make it they make it a possibility of adding a 4th automobile, which I think it goes against what is in the zoning. So that's the way I vote. Is there a motion? Do we need to discuss this further? Is anyone willing to make a motion one way or the other on this? Since we haven't revised the rules, I can't make a motion.
Yeah, the motion is to for unfavorable action.
Okay, so this is unfavorable act.
There would be unfavorable action with regards to the variance. There's also an appeal, whether you choose to make anything on the appeal, you would do that. Typically we are silent, but you know, there's no rules there.
Right. Well, why don't we just talk about
Heather,
the variance?
sorry, Heather did make a motion for unfavorable action regarding the variance.
Right.
Okay.
Is there a second on that?
Yes, I second it.
Okay, I Ching is second. Roll call vote. Sally Dale, please.
So an I vote is to say no to a 4-car garage.
Yes.
Aye.
Okay. I Ching Scott, please.
Aye.
Heather Hannon, please.
Aye.
And Jarius, aye. So we are at 4-0 in disfavor of the garage. Do we want to express an opinion on the appeal?
I think I need clarification.
Well, they're essentially asking, they're saying the ZEO acted inappropriately in denying the building permit.
And what's the basis for that claim?
We can, I can bring it up, but there's a whole basis that's really kind of more on the variance in terms of whether or not that they were wrong. I would ask the applicant. I mean, in terms of why the zoning enforcement officer was wrong, I would ask the applicant in terms of why they think that they were wrong.
Well, was he in compliance with the group 6 accessory uses, paragraph 3, when he denied the request?
Well, he was denied the request because it said this would create a fourth garage. So he denied it. So then they're repealing that denial as well as applying for a variance to get it. So it's kind of a weird situation. We're saying that not only were you wrong, but even if you were right, I want to apply. I want to apply for a variance. So it's a kind of a weird series of events.
I personally don't feel the need to make a comment on the appeal.
No.
So do we have to make a motion for that, to not make a
Nope,
comment?
we can just
Move on.
completely ignore it.
I agree, we can move on.
Okay, excellent. So we are done with the ZBAs. Okay, we are now at 2217.
This takes us to Article 6.
Yes, jump right into Article 6. So for those in the peanut gallery out there in Winchester, I forgot to tell everyone we were being recorded. Well, 2 hours later, folks, are being recorded. I apologize. So the question is, so a group of citizens has filed and received the correct number of signatures to put a question before town as to whether or not the select board should have the authorization to follow it through with the land development agreement with Civico on the Waterfield lot as approved by town meeting in this past spring town meeting. The question before the voters is a yes vote authorizes the select board to continue with the land development agreement, which was authorized by town meeting. A no vote would essentially not allow the select board to go forward with that, leaving the project in some sort of legal limbo. So this board has been a strong proponent and spent an awful lot of time going over the proposals for that lot. The development of that lot is part of the Center Business District. We have long viewed this lot as an important source of housing. And I think, and we've also repeatedly made statements as to the need for affordable housing in the Center Business District as well as elsewhere in town. So the board can choose not to make a statement. The board can choose to make a statement. And I would open the floor.
I have a clarifying question, which is probably dumb, but why are voters voting on this?
The state government allows for a local petition to override actions of town meeting. I think it's an inherently good part of our government because it allows, if residents don't like what town meeting has done, this is the recourse they have to jump in, other than waiting to fire everyone at the next election.
So but my question is it going to the voters as a normal thing?
There will be a special election on June 22nd.
No, I know, but.
Oh, okay. I don't understand your question.
Was it always going to go to the voters?
No.
Okay, that's what I didn't understand, because there's no language when you get the thing in the mail. It doesn't explain why.
Right. No.
Yeah. So it's a special. It's a special election. That's what this is. This is called a special election. It's taking place, like you said, June 22nd, and it's simply due to the fact that is it 3%, Diab? I think you need 3% of the electorate to sign the petition in order to get it on the ballot to be a townwide vote. So that's what happened.
I think if we do make a statement on our position on this referendum, that we should specifically address the reasons that the people who wish to overturn this vote wish to do so, which is, as far as I understand, it's because they do not believe that the town, its volunteers and its staff, have done due diligence on making sure that we're getting the best deal out of this land. And then perhaps incidental to that, or maybe in addition, I'm not sure, they are saying, why the heck are we doing this for 99 years? And so it's the length of the term and it's whether due diligence was done. I am under the impression that due diligence was extremely well done, and that a 99-year land lease is somewhat of a convention in the world of land use and real estate. And I defer to others on that subject.
I think
I
we
just-
agree with you. That's not the issue.
Yeah, there is one clarification, and the proponents of having it, the proponents of the no vote wrote an op-ed in last week's Winchester Star, in which John Miller is quoted as asking whether or not using this for the stated purpose was the best use for the town, and that if there were another type of development on that lot, that it would bring in significantly more revenue to the town. So I believe that it's not just the question you brought up, Sally, which I think really is a lot on people's minds, is whether or not the town was taken to the cleaners by a savvy developer. But it's also a question of whether people believe that putting affordable housing on this lot, which would certainly not return the greatest amount of money, is an appropriate use for this lot. And I don't have, there's a quote from John Miller in that op-ed where I believe he said something very similar to that. I don't have it in front of me.
I think it's obvious that the people who are against it are just against affordable housing, because when we have these other big projects that don't have as much affordable housing, people are against. Well, now I'm getting tied up in what I was trying to say.
Yeah,
you were hitting on the point that no one talked about anything related to school-age children or any of these other craziness when it was all these other projects. So it's only when we're talking about affordable housing do all of these other kind of things get involved.
Right. And I also think the town is on a really strict timeline in terms of compliance with our commitment as a community in a commonwealth to carry our share of affordable housing in our town. And this is right next to the train station. And if there's one thing that people who can't afford a lot of rent also can't afford, it's a car. It's a great place to put affordable housing.
So I'm finding that a lot of these arguments that the proponents of this are putting forth are kind of shifting, and they're arguments that sort of you could try to aim at, but then they would just continue to land on for other things. So like that 25% of it was proposed that it was going to be 25% affordable, now to 66%, and so like that's not a great deal. But I wonder if we make a statement that instead of like trying to address all these little tiny things about, you know, if it's the best deal, if there was due diligence, more positive stance of why we think this is the best and most appropriate use of the land, why physically and metaphorically in the heart of town, we should be embracing this kind of development, you know, like rather than trying to meet them at all these little darts to be like, no, this is how we want to care for our community. And this has been, you know, this is the best and greatest use. And this is what the priority of our town should be, and how great that it's physically in the heart of town.
Right, because if they were on board with that, they wouldn't be making up all these reasons.
No.
I think that along with that, I Ching, I think there are other groups which are making the arguments about due diligence and whether we got the best deal, and that we have to speak from the planning board's strengths, which is our vision for this community, what the master plan says, and where we want to be in 30 years or 50 years. What sort of a building do we want to have on that lot 99 years from now, if we don't plan that far ahead, thank goodness. But, you know, the idea is that we have a very unique perspective. And I think our strength is coming from expressing our opinions from that perspective and leaving all of the monetary and all the other reasons. There are other groups which have a lot more knowledge about what the finances of these projects are and all of that. And I think they will be doing a very good job of advocating that. So I just to kind of get us to bed quickly, since I'm setting off on a long drive tomorrow morning, I would like to do that. I get the feeling from the board is willing to make a public statement in support of the vote yes on Article 6 position, which would retain the vote of town meeting authorizing the select board to enter in the land development agreement with Civico on the Waterfield lot. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so just for the record, everyone on the board has nodded or said yes in Zoom. So the only question is, so that's 4-0, and unfortunately Cheryl is not here with us to add her voice one way or the other. So then the only question is, it's a big one, what do we say? And I Ching, I think you started off with a great beginning. So if you can remember what you said.
Oh, verbally, I would have to edit it out and like write it out. Is that legal in open meeting stuff? But
It certainly is legal, and you could actually, I mean, you could authorize me, I don't know how this would work. You could authorize me to summarize the statements that the board has made, and I can go back and review this video, which I will do tomorrow or
What
maybe
if we
Thursday.
have you guys, what if the two of you are a subcommittee and you write it?
Okay, I think that's perfectly legal. So
Okay.
I Ching, if you if the board will vote, I know that there are other groups waiting for the board to say something. If only that we say we are approved for vote on yes, I think that's great. Why don't I do this? Why don't we have two votes? One is a motion to express our support for the vote on yes, the vote yes on Article 6 position. And then the other motion would be to authorize I Ching and myself to come up with a statement, which we will release. So why don't we do the first motion first?
Okay, I make a motion.
So moved. Okay, the motion is that the planning board is in favor of the vote yes on Article 6 position, which retains the vote of town meeting to authorize the select board to enter into a land disposition agreement
Development.
with land development. Thank you. I'm just writing LDA. LDA with Civico for the Waterfield lot. Okay, so that is the motion. And what is the second? So I Ching moved, and then who seconded it?
I can second.
Was
I
that you,
moved.
Sally? Okay, thank you. So we have Sally as a second, and roll call vote, please. Let me go in reverse screen order. Heather Hennon, please.
Aye.
Okay, Sally Dale, please.
Aye.
I Ching Scott, please.
okay.
And Jarius, aye. We have 4-0 with 1 absent. And then the next motion is to authorize I Ching Scott and Deb Jarius to write a, what are we calling this? A position, a statement, thank you, of support for the vote yes on Article 6 position. Okay, someone want to make that motion?
So moved.
Okay, Sally has made that motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Heather Hannon has seconded it. And roll call vote. everyone's moved on my screen. So, Ching, Scott.
Aye.
Okay, Sally Dale
Aye.
and Heather Hannon.
Aye.
Jarius, aye. That is, I keep doing a tally. I don't know why, since there are only 4 of us here. So that is 4-0 absent. So thank you all very much. We have one final question and we can all go to bed. Back to whether or not we should reschedule our meeting on June the 22nd. We typically do not meet on election nights. I don't know that, I feel no qualms about meeting on June the 22nd, unless, I believe, I forget when the polls are open. Oh,
8 to
darn.
7. 8 to 7.
8 to
Oh, I
7.
think it's 7 to 8.
Oh, it's maybe a 7 to 8. Sorry.
Yeah. That's okay.
Okay, so the only question I have is, does the board care? And if the board does care, should we meet later so that everyone can get to the polls on time?
I don't care.
I don't care.
I don't care, but I ask that we move some of these priority things like the committee, the implementation committee, as well as our priorities to the top of the meeting.
I am so with you on that one,
I am too, I Ching.
Okay, so Brian's going to tell us we can't.
No. I was gonna. No, that's fine.
Sorry.
It was the
Laugh so
question.
hard.
The question was just going to be: are we starting normal time? Or are we starting at 8 o'clock? We're
I
going to
think
start normal time 7:30. If the polls are still open, but anyone who's going to be voting most likely will have voted already. Is that done?
okay. I think we're all going to do normal time.
All right. So 7:30 regular meeting is the next time we'll meet, June 22nd.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Once again, we don't have enough time in the planning board meeting to get everything done, but I appreciate your helping me get as close to time as possible. Okay, anyway, have a great evening. Oh, we have to actually close the meeting, don't we?
I move that we adjourn. Yes.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I do.
Second.
Yay, Heather and me.
Okay, excellent. Roll call vote. Random this time. Sally Dale.
Aye.
Heather Hannon.
Aye.
Ching Scott.
Aye.
Jarius, aye. 4-0. Thank you very much, WinCam. Thank you very much, Nancy, who is our recording secretary. Thank you, Winchester, for hopefully holding on to us. And those of you who have kept on from the North Main Street meeting, thank you very much for doing so. Thank you, Brian. Let's all go to bed. Bye.
Bye.